October 31st evening. It was Halloween again. Since it fell on a Friday this year, the holiday mood was especially lively. Legend said Halloween sprang from an ancient Celtic custom. On this night, the dead might return to their old haunts, searching for substitutes to inhabit. The living, afraid of ghosts, developed all sorts of measures. Some put out their fires and hid, some dressed as monsters to scare spirits away or hide their identities, and some left food outside to placate any wandering souls. Over time, these practices became traditions, and in the modern world, they had turned into costumes and trick-or-treat. In the library, Hermione sat upright in a corner chair, several large books open before her. She read intently, face serious. Loren sat beside her, watching. He blew gently over the page of the storybook in front of him, then lowered it as if reading, stealing glances at Hermione from the corner of his eye. The current breeze made her long eyelashes flutter like tiny brushes. Loren worried she might be straining her eyes. He tried to look casual. Hermione blinked slowly, rubbing at a dry, tired feeling. She shot him an exasperated look. "What time is it?" "5:30, Loren said, peering out the high library window. "The feast starts at 7. Keep reading and I'll call you when it's time." Hermione followed his gaze outside. Autumn days were short. The sky was already dim beneath low clouds. She shut her book. "No more reading. Let's go to the Great Hall to see the pumpkin lanterns." "You care about pumpkin lanterns?" Loren feigned astonishment with exaggerated clumsiness. "I thought you were a complete bookworm." Hermione didn't answer. Madame Pince had noticed them and was giving them a reproving look, so Hermione tidied their books, returned them to the shelf, and stood. Loren fell into step beside her. In the corridor, a draft sent a slight chill along their robes. Loren pulled up his collar, hunched his shoulders, and slipped Hermione's hand into his pocket. She gave him a flat look. The corridor wasn't that cold. It was just a small trick to make holding hands seem natural. It worked. They walked hand in hand toward the Great Hall as Loren rambled through the story he'd skimmed earlier. His retelling was scattered and incomplete, jumping from idea to idea, but Hermione listened attentively and understood. "Halloween started with people putting out their fires to avoid ghosts," he said finally. "Hogwarts didn't put out its fires. Tonight the castle glowed with thousands of pumpkin lanterns. Massive pumpkins, some carved as skulls or demon faces, floated at the ends of corridors and around stairwell turns, green phosphorescent flames burning quietly inside. The house elves had brought pumpkins into the kitchens, baking the best into sweets and carving the rest. Professor Flitwick enchanted many of them to hover and drift. The enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall showed a stormy night, clouds and lightning. Beneath it, thousands of bats fluttered, forming a low, dark cloud that swept over the tables. The candles and pumpkin flames flickered. Hagrid had supplied many of the pumpkins. He stood in a corner, patting thick shells as if they were pets. Professor Sprout peered at the largest with admiration and peppered Hagrid with questions about pumpkin-growing secrets. Students clambered in and out of pumpkin lanterns like mischievous ghosts. Nearly headless Nick had joined in, scaring some first-years who then burst into giggles when their fright passed. A little first-year witch tugged on Hagrid's moleskin sleeve. "Professor Hagrid, next year, can you save the biggest pumpkin and carve it into a pumpkin house or a pumpkin carriage?" Hagrid laughed and agreed. "What happens to all these pumpkins after the festival?" she asked. Hagrid glanced at Loren, who had drifted over to inspect the pumpkins, chin on hand and a look somewhere between thoughtful and scheming. After nearly 7 years of acquaintance, Hagrid could read that look. He hesitated, uncertain how to answer. "Well, the best ones get stored for next year. The damaged ones go to feed the creatures in the Forbidden Forest, and if we can't use them, they get composted." "That sounds wasteful," Loren said. "What do you want?" "If there are extra pumpkins this year, save a few for me. Not the huge ones. Medium or even smaller is fine." Loren made a size gesture with his hands. "As a souvenir." Hagrid brightened. "It's good to have a few mementos from school after you leave. Don't worry, I'll pick out some nice ones." "I want scary ones," Loren added. "No problem." Hagrid grinned and slapped his chest like a promise. Loren squeezed Hermione's hand and watched the pumpkins. Some of the lantern's phosphorescent flames cracked and sputtered, a sign that small gift boxes might be hidden inside. Halloween gift boxes were half surprises, half scares. They might contain chocolate frogs or chess sets, or mice or dung bombs. A first year had just opened a filibuster fireworks box and ended up with his face blackened and hair singed, which sent his friends into hysterics. A few seventh years watched with faint smiles, remembering similar antics. Hermione tilted her head, watching Loren. She squeezed his hand and asked softly, "Why did you ask Hagrid for pumpkins?" "To keep as a souvenir," he said. "For yourself?" "No, well, yes, but not for me to keep. For me to leave." Loren muffled a chuckle. "Professor Babbling's Rune's teaching has helped. I want to leave something at Hogwarts that's meaningful." "What do you mean?" Hermione asked. "I plan to carve a simple displacement array into the pumpkins and seed it with a little spatial magic. The pumpkins will sit in a pocket of space, like the room of requirement, and around Halloween each year a few will briefly appear in washrooms, common rooms after lights out, dark corridors late at night, even by bedsides." Loren looked delightfully mysterious. "They'll show up for a few seconds and disappear again. Properly spooky." Hermione fell silent, imagining the scene. Dim castle lights, dozing students wandering half asleep to the loo when a flash of faint green flame reveals a grinning pumpkin. There'd be a new chapter of hauntings at Hogwarts. By December, the first half of the school year was drawing to a close. 2 more Quidditch matches had been played. Hufflepuff beat Ravenclaw and moved toward the winner's bracket to await Gryffindor in the spring, while Ravenclaw dropped into the loser's bracket with a rematch against Slytherin after the Christmas holiday. First year's flying lessons had ended, and Madame Hooch had already left for her holiday. The 7th year curriculum had entered a delicate stage. Professors had finished teaching new material and were now guiding students through review. Homework piled up, repetitive and high in volume rather than complex, and many assignments were no longer collected. Students reacted differently. Some laughed it off, indifferent to the looming NETs. Others sat at meals with dark circles under their eyes and barely touched their food. McGonagall and Snape warned about stress, advising students not to let it affect classmates and to see Madame Pomfrey if they truly couldn't cope. Hermione still picked out the most valuable problems and spent most weekends in the library. Even her chats with Professor Burbage had become less frequent. Loren, by contrast, had given up on the basic review work. He spent his free time in the room of requirement transfigured into a potions classroom, studying a new spatial displacement array from a manuscript. Several carved pumpkins, Hagrid's, saved from the festival, floated nearby. He had already engraved simple arrays into a few of them and fed wisps of spatial magic into their cores, completing short-distance displacement tests. The process had taken a month. Flamel and Professor Babbling both said it was fast progress. Loren planned to finish the full design before graduation, then pull a few friends into production and launch the device commercially. His big plan. The timeline was uncertain. He teased that if he worked too hard now, he might owe his future 2 years of idleness, serving as Hermione's house husband in the meantime. Behind every successful woman, he joked. One afternoon in December, a grandfather clock in the room of requirement chimed and a crow flew out, cawing. Loren pushed the enchanted pumpkins aside and left the room, heading down to the Great Hall. Snow fell thickly outside now, torches along the walls throwing an orange glow that made the flakes sparkle. A few drifted indoors and melted at the doorway. A familiar figure stood framed by firelight and snow at the hall entrance. Hermione had been there a while. Her curly hair was dusted with snow, a cashmere scarf around her neck. She didn't look cold. The flakes softened her outline. She looked up as Loren approached and smiled. "Why are you waiting here?" Loren took her hand and squeezed it. "It's warm in the hall. If you stand here in the cold, you'll catch your death." "It's not cold," she said quietly, voice like the wind. "I wanted to see the snow." He teased. "Are Harry and the others here?" "They took the cake to Hagrid's hut." "By hand?" "A bunch of fools. It'll be frozen solid by the time they get there." "You're a fool too, standing at the entrance. Your brain must be frozen." "It's not cold," she repeated. Truly, it wasn't for her. Her hands were warm and cozy in his. They wrapped their scarves tighter and left the hall, leaving 2 neat lines of footprints through the snow toward Hagrid's hut at the edge of the forbidden forest. The grounds were white. The humping willow's bare branches were capped with glistening drifts. Few students walked the path. Many were in Hogsmeade at the Three Broomsticks with butterbeer or curled up by castle fireplaces. They were heading to Hagrid's. December 6th, 1997, was Hagrid's 69th birthday. Protest. Loudly protest. Noon at Hagrid's hut. The already spacious room had been expanded. The ceiling rose more than 30 feet, and from it hung smoked chickens and an entire black bear hide. The walls were decorated with a pink parasol, a mole fur coat, and a giant crossbow. The floor still held the same solid wooden boards. The old copper kettle had been moved off the stove and replaced by a massive cauldron that steamed and bubbled. In one corner sat a large bed with a quilt pieced together from scraps. At first glance it looked shabby, but gaps in the seams revealed pristine white down and a few strands of unicorn tail hair. Along with the other valuable oddments scattered about the hut, these details gave the place a faint air of mystery. A huge wooden table and chairs stood before the hearth. Around it were gathered 5 students, 2 giants, and a hound, sharing a lunch Hagrid and Grop had prepared over the morning, a steaming pot of meat stew and a basket of pies for each person. "Happy birthday, Hagrid," they chorused. "Happy birthday." Tsk, who would have thought Hagrid is already 69? There's still no proper study on giant lifespans. This is no time for research talk. Thank you, thank you. Hagrid was so moved he could barely speak, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. The half-giant wept like a child, and feeling a little embarrassed at such behavior for a professor, he stuffed a few pies in his hands to hide his face. The pies were a bit dry, so he grabbed a bowl the size of his head and slurped down the scalding stew. The stew had been started early, brisket, ribs, and knuckle bones with cured ham and smoked turkey all thrown into the giant cauldron to simmer. When the time was right, a portion was ladled into a smaller pot with garden tomatoes, potatoes, and carrots. The meat base was indescribable. Every savory note combined, the broth rich with rendered fat and collagen, softened by the sweetness of vegetables. It slid warm and comforting down the throat, seeping into the bones and skin. Hagrid dunked a Mrs. Weasley pie into the stew, letting the crust soak up broth before biting in. The combination turned the dry crust succulent. He had only meant to eat enough to compose himself, but pie and stew proved irresistible. Before he knew it, he'd eaten half a basket and sat back with a contented sigh. The cauldron's level dropped noticeably. Grop, the pureblood giant, looked anxious. He hadn't yet mastered human speech, so he could only stammer. "Slow. Grop, chop wood. Wait for Loren." Loren understood the gist. Grop had chopped the firewood for the stew, and they'd been waiting for him. The stew had been simmering for hours. The aroma had been torturous. If Grop hadn't waited for Loren and the others, he would have eaten sooner. He gave up protesting and began to eat in earnest, shoveling the bubbling stew into his mouth and stuffing in pies until his tongue went numb. Hiss, phoo, he breathed between mouthfuls, not slowing. Pureblood giants were nothing if not hearty. Loren watched with a grin. He preferred the brisket, lean meat and tendons broken down to tenderness. Hermione and Ginny beside him favored the carrots, sweet and melting. Harry and Ron were both wolfing their food without worrying that it was piping hot, hot breath steaming in front of them. Loren had planned for a crowd. There was still half a cauldron left, and Hagrid's store of homegrown produce would easily feed 2 giants more. If needed, rock cakes and fruit cakes by the fire, frozen solid, would fill any gaps. After lunch, Grop lay sprawled across Hagrid's bed, half on the floor, utterly slack, stomach rolling audibly as something sloshed within. Hagrid moved the 2 giant cauldrons against the wall and covered them, saving them for reheating with rock cakes for their evening meal. Harry and Ron cleared pots and plates while the girls wiped the table. Having provided the recipe, Loren sat back, exempt from the chores. He lounged on a chair draped with a unicorn hide blanket, perfectly calm and unbothered, neither sleepy nor particularly thoughtful, just pleasantly vacant. Hermione came over, sat beside him, leaned on him for a while, then whispered, "I want to sit by the door and feel the breeze." Loren considered. The fireplace still blazed, and after such a heavy meal, the hut felt a touch stuffy. His cheeks were a little flushed. A bit of cool air sounded pleasant. "Just for a little while," he said lazily. "Can't stay long." They moved the chair to the doorway and cracked the door open. Cold wind pushed in and threaded tiny snowflakes across the threshold. Each melted where it touched skin, leaving a clean chill. A stray lock of Hermione's hair brushed Loren's face, making him smile. Professor McGonagall has started taking names for students staying at Hogwarts for Christmas. Are we staying or going home? Hermione asked. Home, Loren said. No reason to stay. If I don't go back soon, Grandpa Bates will start scolding me. We'll write letters tonight, Hermione said. We can use Hanch to deliver them. Once he goes home, he won't need to come back right away. Winter weather, fewer deliveries. Hermione shivered and shut the door against the wind. It's not that you need the letters, but Hanch has to deliver my letters to Nancy, to the magazine, and to the pen pals I write to. Nancy, Loren mused. The Wizards of the American Magical Congress came to mind. After a moment, he asked, It's almost half a year now. Nancy and Pickley, aren't they heading home for Christmas? Yes, Hermione nodded. The Death Eater trials are over, and the Ministry's cleanup is mostly wrapped up. They're going home. Mr. Quahog is going back too to finish the final election for Congress president. When's he leaving? Probably the weekend before Christmas, the same weekend we go home. After being away from the American Magical Congress headquarters for half a year, does he still have a chance? Loren asked. Don't forget Nancy and Pickley came with him, Hermione said softly, her voice steady and deliberate as she ticked off alliances and support, families they represented, Ilvermorny backing, and so on. She analyzed the candidates like a chess player seeing several moves ahead. Outside the wind wailed and the hearth glowed. Loren listened, watching the girl at his side with a somewhat distant gaze. She was impressive. I remember the International Confederation of Wizards is meeting again soon, he said. Next summer, Hermione replied. They meet every 4 years. The last was during our 4th year. Loren thought a moment, then changed the subject. Could you arrange for me to meet Mr. Quahog? Hermione looked surprised, but said she'd try. December 19th. Loren sat across from Neville at a round table. Neville, always conscientious, had been asked by Professor McGonagall to pass on a message in person. Though gentle and cheerful, Neville took his duties seriously. If he couldn't reason with a classmate about rules, he would consult Parvati and report to McGonagall. As Loren's roommate, Neville was fond of him. He had even sent boxes of honeydukes on holidays, but McGonagall's request left him no choice. There have been several strange incidents lately, Neville began, sighing. The castle bathrooms, the common rooms, even the Hufflepuff dorms. Over a dozen first years reported seeing a grin, like a demon's smile at midnight. It appears and disappears quickly. Neville continued, reluctant. Based on the descriptions, Professor Flitwick says it matches the Halloween pumpkin lanterns. Really? Loren propped his chin on his hand, baffled. Pumpkin lanterns appearing and disappearing? Hogwarts still manages to surprise after 7 years here. Neville looked helpless. All the professors were in a meeting. Hagrid says most of the pumpkin lanterns were destroyed. Only a few of the scarier ones were kept, and some of those were given to you as souvenirs. Loren's expression darkened. What does that mean? Are they assuming it was me? Neville hesitated. Professor Babbling said she's been helping you with that spatial teleportation alchemy array recently. So they connect those two things and draw a conclusion? Loren flared. Slander. Pure slander. Neville told him the verdict. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape think the evidence is consistent with your past behavior. The principal made the ruling. No points will be taken from Gryffindor, but you have 2 weeks spawning, detention. You're to report to Mr. Filch after the Christmas holiday. No appeal? The principal's decision is final in the first instance. Neville looked miserable at having to enforce it. Loren protested loudly, railing at the lack of direct evidence, at judgment based on stereotype, at the betrayal of fair process, then sat muttering to himself. Neville stood to pack. Hogwarts let out early for Christmas. The Hogwarts Express would leave promptly in the morning to carry students home. Harry and Ron were nearly packed, arguing over a half-finished game of wizard's chess. Seamus, to his joy and dismay, had managed to stay at Hogwarts this year. He'd persuaded his witch mother, a former student, to let him remain, but most of their year would be going home. It took Loren several minutes to recover from the indignity of being given detention so close to graduation after years without trouble. Seamus, watching Loren, pulled a face as he packed. Loren clapped him on the shoulder. "You look glum. Mourning Hogwarts' moral decline and my injustice?" "Not at all," Seamus snapped, blunt as ever. "For Merlin's sake, tell me straight, were those pumpkin lanterns your prank?" "This wasn't a prank," Loren bristled. "It was a souvenir I left for Hogwarts." "So you admit it," Seamus grinned. Loren launched into a tirade about procedural justice, fairness, neutrality, and reciprocity, high-flown phrases that set the dormitory laughing and eased the mood. A short time later, a dignified man closed his suitcase and sat with a long exhale. "Finally, I can go home," he said, relaxing into the nearest bed. "It was interesting work," Nancy said from a nearby sofa, smiling. "The trials were significant experience for the Congress, but the food here, terrible." Pickley waved a hand. "I thought our cuisine was bad, but British cooking is worse." "We're leaving tomorrow," the man said. "By the way, has Mr. Cohoge decided where to meet Loren?" Nancy asked. "It's been decided." "Where?" "On the Hogwarts Express." December 20th, Saturday. In the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, Loren and the others woke earlier than usual for classes. After breakfast, they returned to the dorm, neatly folded their sheets and duvets, slipped them into the wardrobe, and tucked sachets of insect repellent inside to retrieve after the holidays. Some of them even suggested leaving a puffskein or two. Those little creatures were excellent at keeping moths and insects away. Before leaving, they drew the curtains to keep dust from settling on the beds. Everything was packed and in order, just waiting for the train. Loren counted the Christmas gifts he planned to leave for the professors. In past years, he'd sent them by owl on Christmas Eve, but this year, he intended to leave them inside the castle for delivery to the professors' offices on Christmas morning. Every time he pictured the professors' faces when they found the presents, he couldn't help but lean back and smile. What a surprise that would be. This was Merlin's surprise. Seamus, for reasons of his own, had also gotten up early despite staying at school and had come downstairs with them. Instead of going back to sleep, he sat by their side and watched them pack, like a child left behind. Loren didn't mind. He patted the craft paper parcel in his hand and said with a smile, "Seamus, this is your Christmas present from me. I'll hide it in the castle, and it'll appear in front of you on Christmas Day." "Then why are you telling me now?" Seamus frowned at the package, looking a little distressed. "That'll just make me curious. I'll be desperate to know what's inside." "That's exactly the point," Loren chuckled. A few roommates teased him for being mischievous, then told Seamus the gifts they'd prepared had already been handed to the house elves and would also be delivered on Christmas Day. If he wanted clues, they could give him a few. Seamus fell silent. They laughed and chatted for a while until most things were packed, then sat by the window sharing the snack box Neville had provided. From there, they couldn't see Hogsmeade Station, but they could see white steam puffing from the train's chimney. "Harry, where are you spending Christmas?" Loren asked. "The Burrow, Grimmauld Place, or are you going back to the Dursleys to check in?" Harry shook his head. "I'm going to Godric's Hollow to clear out the house my parents left me. I'm finishing school soon, and I need to find somewhere to live. I can't always stay at Ron's or Sirius's." "What's wrong with that?" Ron immediately protested. "Our whole family welcomes you at the Burrow. I told Mum you were coming for Christmas, and she was thrilled." Harry smiled and shook his head without elaborating. "Of course, I'd love to spend Christmas at the Burrow. I think it will be a wonderful holiday. I just need to tidy up my parents' house first." "We can come help," Ron offered. "That would be even better." Listening to them, Loren looked out the window. Wind and snow had whitened the ground. The forbidden forest and the distant hills were dusted with snow. Sky and earth blended into a vast, seamless white. They had all grown up together, almost without noticing. By 10 in the morning, a bitter north wind swept through the entrance to the great hall. Torches flickered and flared, doing their best to keep the cold out. It was too frigid for idle chatter. Students leaving Hogwarts clustered in the entrance, trunks at their sides, house scarves pulled high, collars up to their chins, leaving no room for the cold. Loren and Hermione stood shoulder to shoulder, watching friends pass. They nodded and exchanged few words. The distant whistle of the train sounded. A few plumes of soot drifted over the station. Some students put on gloves, drew up hoods, tightened scarves, hauled trunks, and plunged into the wind and snow. "Let's go. Goodbye." They vanished into the white, leaving footprints that were quickly covered by those of the students behind them. Loren stepped into the carriage, loosened his scarf, and let out a long, satisfied breath. Even after 7 years, he didn't understand exactly how the Hogwarts Express was powered, but the warm air in the carriage suggested boilers, and it felt good. He found an empty compartment, set down his trunk, took off his gloves, and was immediately sleepy. Hermione stowed her trunk in Owl Cage, then turned to him with a mildly exasperated look. "Did you forget? Quohog is waiting for you at the back." "I almost did." Loren stood up. "I'll go meet him. Wait here for me. If the witch who sells snacks comes by, get me a pumpkin juice." "Okay. Make it hot." "Got it. And a box of chocolate frogs." Hermione gave him a look, but he was already down the corridor toward the rear of the train. At the end of the carriage, a closed compartment door stood quiet. Loren paused, glanced at the number above it, and knocked. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged wizard with a full beard. His face was rugged and unrestrained, but he smiled warmly when he saw the young wizard at the door. "Oh, my dear Loren, long time no see. Come in." "Long time, Quohog." Loren stepped inside. The compartment was roomy and bright. The temperature difference had fogged the window glass into a thin mist, blurring the outside into soft color blocks. No one else was there. They sat facing one another. Their appearances hadn't changed much since a few months ago. Quohog regarded Loren, who seemed to have grown a bit taller, without any condescension, just thoughtful interest. A few months prior, he had personally witnessed that legendary duel, an underage wizard defeating the most powerful dark wizard in history in less than 10 minutes. It had been swift and decisive. Quohog believed Loren would grow into a wizard of great influence, perhaps a figure to shape an era. Loren studied Quohog in turn. The man seemed a little out of place in this life. His beard was thicker now, almost Hagrid-like. The familiar atmosphere turned unexpectedly formal as they both adopted polite manners. Loren smoothed his expression into a bright smile, showing no trace of the sleepiness from moments before. "Quohog, I never expected you to arrange to meet on the Hogwarts Express." Quohog laughed heartily. "I've been here for half a year. Scrimgeour's taken me to many places, wizarding communities, muggle cities. I've seen all sorts of things, but I never had the chance to visit Hogwarts. I thought I'd take the train this time." "How does it feel?" "Very smooth, much better than Ilvermorny's school bus." Quohog grimaced as if remembering sour memories. "I went to Ilvermorny when I was younger. The school bus was an old diesel vehicle, always rattling, smelling of exhaust. Don't remind me." He waved a hand and steered the conversation back. "Enough reminiscing. Let's get to business. What is so important that the future legendary wizard wants to meet me in person?" "Don't make fun of me, Quohog." Loren smiled and shook his head, then grew more serious. "But there is an important matter I'd like your help with." "Tell me." As the future president of the American Magical Congress, Quohog raised an eyebrow at the phrasing, but Loren went on. "I'd like your view on the mainstream methods we use for spatial displacement and whether you've noticed their flaws." "Flaws? Be specific." Quohog's curiosity was piqued. His political instinct told him there might be more beneath the surface, an arrangement, a negotiation, something deeper. Loren spoke deliberately. "Apparition is suited only to short distances. You can only apparat to places you've personally been or seen. Unfamiliar places require careful exploration. It also demands high skill and carries risk. Fireplace travel has even more limits. You need a connection to the Ministry's transport links, and you can only go to fireplaces on the Flu network. Port keys are limited as well." These were, of course, textbook observations. The existing methods had been analyzed and debated for centuries. Quohog listened, a sharpness in his eyes that didn't quite match his face. "So you have a solution to these flaws?" Loren nodded, smiling. "You've been at the Ministry of Magic for nearly 6 months. You must have met Tekros, right? You mean the apparition improvements they've been working on?" Quohog pictured the pale face of the Director of Transportation. An academic, clever at theory, inexperienced in politics, he fit the ministry's current state. Quahog had seen the reports. They've improved apparition to reduce the risk of splinching and to increase safety and distance to an extent, he said. But the fundamental problems remain. I don't see what you mean yet. No, I want to introduce a new kind of spatial displacement device. Loren tapped his wand and a scattering of runes appeared, shimmering in the compartment. Light and shadow coalesced into an intricate, obscure alchemical diagram. With help from the legendary wizard Nicholas Flamel and several Hogwarts professors, we've designed a device that addresses the shortcomings of traditional methods. It offers the convenience and comfort of the Flu network and transmission distances that rival or even surpass port keys. Quahog tried to picture the glowing spatial array, comparing it with the scant alchemical knowledge from his student days, but the ideas swam in his head and grew dizzy. He blinked and fixed his gaze on Loren. So why am I here? What exactly are you asking of me? Loren dispelled the runes with a flick and chuckled. As the future president of the American Magical Congress, and likely a leading candidate to head the International Confederation of Wizards after Dumbledore retires, I hope you can help promote this device globally. A new device to the whole world. Quahog's surprise was plain. Politically, if the device truly fixed the old problems, it would eventually replace older methods, but Loren's push for rapid global rollout put him on edge. He narrowed his eyes and studied Loren carefully. Loren's smile remained steady and composed, and Quahog took time to think. Finally, he reclined in his seat. I'm sorry, my dear Loren, but I can't agree to that, at least not yet. Why? Loren asked calmly. I don't understand what you gain from hesitating. Quahog's tone was even, seasoned. Since graduating, I've worked across departments in the American Magical Congress and dealt with Muggle governments. I've met thousands of people, wizards and Muggles alike, and everyone wants something. Experience is wisdom, Loren agreed. So I'm even more puzzled. You want to promote this device worldwide. Quahog leaned in as if reading his thoughts. What do you want to achieve with that? Maybe wealth, maybe fame. Both are possible, Loren said. If those were your goals, then through alchemy, your wealth could be endless, and publicly revealing that duel would make wizards everywhere praise your name, Quahog observed. But you don't seem to be after those. Quahog's words were almost a compliment. Dumbledore's recommendation had inclined him to trust Loren, but decades in politics left him wary of things he couldn't see through. A flicker of caution remained in his eyes. Loren smiled and returned the praise lightly. Keen intuition. A man like you will make a great Congress president. You still haven't answered my question, Morgan. Before I answer that, there's another topic we need to discuss. Another topic? The conflict between wizards and muggles, or more broadly, the conflict between technological civilization and magical civilization. They chatted until nearly noon. Mr. Quahog, let's stop here for today, Loren said, breaking off to say goodbye. If you have any other questions, feel free to write to me. Quahog nodded, still a little dazed as if he were carrying the weight of their last conversation. It took him a moment to collect himself. With a wry smile, he began, Loren, you really are. He let the sentence trail off, shook his head, and sighed. I'll admit, this plan is beyond what I imagined. I can't agree to it on the spot, but I'll think it over and give you my reply before the International Confederation of Wizards convenes. I'll look forward to your news, Loren said. They agreed to meet again the following year. Quahog opened the window, waved his wand, and slipped off the fast-moving train, disappearing into the vast, snowy landscape. The figure sprinting away looked as if he were fleeing. Loren watched him go and couldn't help smiling. Back in their compartment, it was exactly lunchtime. The witch pushing the trolley had just passed. Nearly half of the snacks and pastries were gone. The most popular items were hot drinks, pumpkin juice and butterbeer, and a steaming kind of ice cream whose appeal Loren still didn't understand. He stopped the trolley and bought a pile of treats. A whole half bag cost only 10 sickles. A bargain. The school train, apparently untouched by modern business practices, still sold things cheaply. Hermione sat mostly silent, staring at the 2 snacks before her and the heap of candies beside them. Didn't you only want pumpkin juice and a chocolate frog? She asked Loren. I ran into her on the way back, Loren said. You Before she could finish, Loren peeled a nut and popped it into her mouth. After she swallowed, he quickly shoved a hazelnut chocolate at her, quieting her protest. Hermione turned and tried to dodge, but he caught her. She glared at him, then gave up and asked in a muffled voice, "Has Mr. Quahog left?" He jumped off the train. He's surprisingly agile for his age. Hermione frowned. That sounds like he left in a hurry. That's odd. What did you two talk about? Was it important? It was about promoting new spatial devices, Loren said. It's not urgent yet. According to his rough plan, the device was only at the preliminary design stage. Refinement and adaptation would be tedious and time-consuming. Once the designs were ready for production, that's when the pure-blood families would step in to help, and only then could they begin worldwide promotion with Quahog as assistants. Even with everyone's best effort, it would take years. Setbacks could extend that. Hermione regarded him intently. Are you hiding something you plan to tell me later? That's right. When is later? Her eyes widened and her cheeks flushed with curiosity. She looked particularly pretty. He smiled. After graduation, I don't want this to affect your career choices. Hermione fell quiet, thinking. Career choices. If their conversation reached the Ministry of Magic, it involved more than just promoting a device. Maybe it touched the whole magical world. Before she could consider further, Loren offered her another sweet. She opened her mouth without much thought. The candy, a cockroach clusters, wriggled as it met her tongue. Silky tentacles and many thin legs clung and crawled, as if trying to work their way down her throat or out through her nose. The sensation made her scalp tingle. After years of being teased by Loren into trying them, she no longer resisted as much, but a living, writhing insect inside her mouth still made her shiver. Only when the outer chocolate melted and lemon syrup burst out, bathing her taste buds in fragrance, did the discomfort fade. "Loren Morgan," Hermione scolded, glaring wide-eyed. Loren blinked, pretending innocence, another candy poised to feed her. He earned a good-natured smack. Life in London settled into a calm but slightly dull rhythm. The Grangers' clinic was closed for the holiday, but the family was never idle. Between dinners and seasonal balls, and invitations from patients and medical associations, their social calendar filled up. Grandpa Bates had joined a raft of clubs and interest groups and was busier than the dentists. In the days before Christmas, Loren and Hermione helped decorate the house and drove Grandpa Bates's car for holly, mistletoe, and groceries. Sometimes traffic officers would glance suspiciously at their youthful faces, check for licenses, and then, baffled, let them go. Decorations were finished just before Christmas, a sparkling tree in the yard, a few abstract snowmen, holly on the walls. The mistletoe was bare of berries by custom, so it looked plain. On Christmas Eve, both families finally found time to sit down together for a feast. Monica popped a crispy egg tart into her mouth and sighed with pleasure. "Loren, when are you two going back to school?" "Late January, I think." "When do you graduate? When will you leave?" "Mid to late June." "Have you decided what you'll do after graduation?" Loren replied. "Hermione plans to join the Ministry of Magic's department for the regulation and control of magical creatures, and I'll go to the Alchemy Research Center." Grandpa Bates, cutting steak, spoke up. "You're about to graduate and have jobs lined up, but you're not going to a regular university, are you?" They nodded. "Then we can start planning the wedding." "Cough! Cough!" Wendell choked on his food, gasping for milk. Monica smiled, unfazed. Bates watched Loren with a determined look. "They're only 17 and 18. It's too early to talk about this," Wendell sputtered. Hermione buried her head in her plate and muttered, "According to wizards' counting, 17 is adult. After finding jobs, starting a family is next." Bates smiled serenely, as if stating the obvious. In his mind, as Loren's only parent and relative, he had every right to start thinking about marriage arrangements. "I don't care. They're wizards, but their family is still a muggle family. They don't have to follow all wizarding customs." Wendell grew red-faced. He'd planned ice fishing with his two friends over the holidays. Now his irritation at their precociousness boiled over. "All right then," he muttered. Bates wasn't done. "Let's talk about where they'll live after graduation. Hanch and Crookshanks can live at home, but when wizarding colleagues visit, owl deliveries will leave traces of magic. Staying in Hampstead might attract attention." "What are you getting at?" Wendell asked suspiciously. You mean you'll find them somewhere quieter to live? Everyone was startled. Loren choked on a chicken leg and gulped milk. Grandpa Bates, let's talk about this after graduation, he said. Are you sure? Bates pressed. There are several estates for sale near London, well-located, well-kept castles. There's no rush, Loren said. Wizards don't lack houses. Many pureblood families are selling properties these days. I'll keep an eye out when I return to school. Hermione and I will decide together. Bates looked disappointed but not surprised. Monica watched them with a gentle smile. Wendell's glare lingered over Loren. Hermione, shy as ever, kept her head bowed. Where's the tea room? Draco Malfoy asked the young healer calmly. 6th floor, the healer answered. Draco nodded and headed toward it. The medicinal smell from the enclosed ward had tightened his throat. Nearby, Lucius and Narcissa stood in subdued conversation. The Malfoys had long been generous donors to St. Mungo's and received certain privileges. Even patients under strict magical detention could have visitors, though under strong precautions. The patient had been given the draught of living death and lay in deep sleep. High-ranking healers accompanied the visitors, and several dual-trained healers stood by, either to prevent a sudden attack or to guard the visitors themselves. A young healer named Augustus Pye trailed him, offering to guide him through the complex hospital layout. Draco left the ward with an unreadable expression. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the bed. The messy old robes he remembered had been replaced by a hospital gown. The patient had filled out a little and now slept peacefully. What drew his attention most was the metallic prosthetic hand, faintly shimmering silver. The nameplate at the head of the bed read, Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix was his mother's sister and a veteran Death Eater awaiting trial. Draco had no memory of Lord Voldemort from before his birth. His first real impressions of Aunt Bellatrix came after Voldemort's return, and her presence had always made him uncomfortable. He pushed through a set of doors and climbed a wooden staircase whose planks creaked threateningly. With all the donations they get, can't they spare a few galleons to fix the stairs? He muttered. Donations are for the patients, Augustus said softly. If the stairs are usable, they'll keep them. Portraits of elderly healers lined the walls, unkempt men with scraggly beards, some practically grotesque. As he climbed, the portraits began to shout diagnoses. Young master, your flesh is dry, your hair about to wither, one called in a harsh medieval voice. Draco looked annoyed. Augustus frantically gestured for him not to engage. This is a chronic skin and hair disease, young master, one portrait proclaimed. Your hairline will recede, your hair will fall out and never grow back. You'll be bald. Who are you calling bald? Draco snapped, hot with indignation. Only by taking snake venom mixed with toad mucus in precise proportions, applying it evenly to the scalp, and hanging upside down like a bat from a tower ledge during a full moon can it be cured. I am not bald, he insisted. But your hairline is receding, the portrait persisted. That's genetic. Everyone in my family is like this, Draco shouted. Go back in your frame and don't bother me. When he reached the tea room, he gulped several cups of strong tea, though his temper was slow to cool. He took a different stare on the way back, avoiding the worst of the talking portraits, and felt a little better. Back in the ward, his parents were listening to the healer's report. The patient's condition is stable, the chief healer said. The only ongoing issue is a gradual weakening of the magic in the prosthetic limb. The child in her womb is developing normally, and if all goes well, will be born on the second Sunday in April. On Easter? Narcissa asked. Yes. The healer hesitated, as if uneasy about the subject, but continued. After consultation with ministry experts, we found no signs of dark arts. We expect a healthy, normal child. Lucius was quiet for a long moment before he spoke slowly. Please inform the ministry that if it is indeed a healthy, normal child, the House of Malfoy is willing to adopt the child, but the matter must be kept secret. Ding-a-ling! The campanula bells on the door frame swayed, their copper clappers tapping the outer wall with a clear, pleasant sound. Hogsmeade was full of them. Ribbons and evergreen boughs hung everywhere, and the village was dressed in its special Christmas finery. Most shops along the street had their doors half closed, only a few shop assistants inside. The rest of the villagers were reunited with friends and family, soaking up the festive air and getting ready for Christmas and the New Year. In the alley of houses behind the main street, a man shoveled snow from a doorstep, unaware that someone had slipped inside and was watching him. The man wore a gray-brown robe. His face wasn't striking, but there was a gentleness about him that made him pleasant to look at. Unlike the neighbors who used quick charms to fling snow in neat drifts, he piled it carefully by the drain and then tapped his wand, guiding the meltwater into the pipes. The figure in the doorway was tall, with vivid pink hair that caught the light. She wore a cashmere coat over a snug sweater that showed the curve of her figure. Her manner was crisp, but there was a softness to her now, an obvious small bump at her stomach that lent her a kind of maternal tenderness. Remus Lupin put down the shovel, turned and smiled gently. "Why are you out here? Aren't you warm by the fire?" "Wanted some fresh air," she said. "Shall I open a window?" Remus took her arm and led her inside, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We bought this place in a hurry. The windows and corridors need work. We'll fix them up after the baby's born. Anything else we need, write it down." Tonks sank onto the sofa and let her eyes sweep the room, a little dazed. "From now on, this will be our home." "Yes, our home," Remus echoed softly, the gentle tone of his voice turning a touch wistful. "I'd have preferred somewhere in London, closer to the ministry, easier for your commute." "Don't," Tonks said with a wave of one hand, frowning. "I shouldn't have told them I was pregnant. First they wouldn't let me do field work. Now they've stopped me from training new recruits. I spend all day at the Auror office, wiping flies off paperwork. I'm starting to worry the baby in my tummy will go moldy from boredom." "You don't want to take the baby hunting dark wizards, surely?" Remus teased. "I wouldn't mind being on cordon and search operations, or at least let me train new recruits." Remus sighed, amused and helpless at once, but he didn't scold her into rest. He simply rubbed her hands. "If you want to be active, be active. Make it clear to Kingsley and the others. There are only a few months left. By the time the baby comes, Harry and the others will have just graduated and joined the Auror office. You can train them yourself. After I give birth, who'll still be training recruits?" Tonks paused, as if her thoughts were slightly fogged by pregnancy, then brightened. "By then, most of the dark wizards will have been driven out. I'll go find Mundungus and make him cough up all his smuggling routes. I'll teach those wizards who exploit loopholes a lesson." "All right." Remus's face stayed calm and kind. With Voldemort and the Death Eaters defeated, there was no sweeping danger anymore. But Tonks had come of age in the worst of the war. She'd seen cruel things and survived them, stubborn and fierce. Even now, newly married, he didn't want this wild rose tamed into something delicate and caged. "I wonder who this child will grow up to be like." Tonks read his thought in his expression and slapped his hand away from her belly. "Don't you dare. Lycanthropy isn't hereditary. You heard about the research from New York and read the report yourself. And you're still hesitating? The child better not be as indecisive as you. Oh, and that's why you never answered my confession back then. Don't you think about that, and you still owe me a wedding." Remus fell silent. Witches could do that, bring up old grievances for no reason, and pregnant witches were especially quick to sting. He'd made an idle remark and was being ticked off for it. Just then, the bells on the door rang again. "Remus, Remus," a voice called from outside. "Open up quickly. I've brought your goddaughter to see my godson." Sirius's voice boomed, followed by a rapid pounding that made the bells go ding-a-ling-a-ling until everyone inside felt a little dizzy. What did he mean, his godson? The child hadn't even been born yet. And since when had anyone asked Remus to be the godfather? "It's so beautiful here." A red-haired girl pressed her hands to the dusty windowsill, a little sprinkle of snow on her fair cheeks that only made her look more winsome. She leaned forward to peer at the village, the church lights burning through stained glass, warm yellow lamps glowing along the streets, and flurries of snow like feathers, catching the lights like stars. Beside her, the boy with the lightning scar also leaned on the sill. His green eyes were thoughtful, as if remembering something. "Are you planning to live here after graduation?" Ginny asked. "My mum always hoped I'd move to the borough," Harry said when she turned to him. "Bill and Fleur have their own place now. Charlie's off with dragons in Romania. Percy and Dad are always at different ends of the day, and Fred and George are at the shop. Mum says the place is so quiet she can't find anyone to talk to. Harry grinned. Loren says that's how parents are. Miss you when you're gone, then complain when you're home. Ginny smiled, but it was tinged with thought. When she'd gone home for the holidays, Mum had fussed and cooked and smiled. By the end of Christmas, she'd been grumbling again. At least Ron will stay with Mrs. Weasley after we graduate, Ginny said, half laughing, half worried. They fell into plans for the house. The sofa in the living room, the table, chairs, they all need replacing. The kitchenware, the cloakroom wardrobe, the curtains in this bedroom are useless. What color would you like? Harry asked suddenly. Why are you asking me? Ginny blurted, cheeks flushing and looking away. What does it matter what color I like? I think it matters a lot, Harry murmured and leaned closer. At that small distance, they could feel each other's warm breath. Creak! An old hinge complained loudly. They both jumped and turned. The door flew open and a freckled, furry head peered in. Ron took one look at their guilty faces, scowled and shouted, This is ridiculous. I'm out here doing the hard work of cleaning the house, and you two are in here getting mushy. Who do you think you are? After graduation, who's moving in? Just the two of you. No way Mum will let Ginny move out. Harry felt a flicker of regret. Why had he dragged Ron along? Meanwhile, elsewhere in Hogsmeade, Bates sat on a sofa with stacks of documents, every crease of his brow showing concentration. The bank had pulled together detailed costs for buying and restoring some old castles, purchase prices, repair estimates, property taxes, and maintenance standards. Grandpa Bates, you're looking at houses again? Why are you back so soon? Grandpa Bates grunted, not taking his eyes off the papers. The holiday's almost over. Spend these last days with Hermione. Go out, have fun. Otherwise, you'll be back at school under closed management, and it'll be 6 months before you're home again. School isn't a prison. Bates went on studying the figures, only half listening. After a pause, he said, If you've got time, go fishing with Wendell. If Hermione's parents take to you, things will go a lot smoother after graduation. Don't talk about it in front of him, someone muttered, an aside about being smoother. If I don't say anything, who knows how long you two will put it off? Young people these days. Yeah, you're right. Loren wandered upstairs, retreated to his room, and threw himself into a fantastic book. With Professor Babbling's help, he'd optimized the runic array and made breakthroughs in precise spatial control and the stable output of the Philosopher's Stone. That let him etch a complex new device into a pumpkin lantern and run successful short-distance displacement tests. But the trial showed flaws. While a single lantern teleported reliably, multiple lanterns teleported at once landed off target. After careful observation and talks with Flamel, they suspected simultaneous arrays were interfering with each other. Loren hadn't yet a way to eliminate that interference. He was attempting to rebuild array stability while keeping the basic runes, a risky reconstruction he and Flamel hoped might work. Outside his window, the snow fell, and at his neighbor's house, Hermione Granger cradled a hot cup of tea between her hands. She sipped cautiously, lips reddened by the heat, and pretended to study the taste while furtively hiding 2 blushes on her cheeks. Wendell clattered in the kitchen preparing fishing bait, noisy chopping and scraping that sounded like corn and frozen meat. Monica sat opposite, feigning concentration on a pink macaron while actually watching her daughter. After another small sip, Hermione started, Where did you two go just now? The cinema, she murmured. It must have been crowded during the holidays? No one else was in our showing. Monica looked at Hermione's very red lips and fell silent. Then she rose, slipped an arm around Hermione's shoulders, and began to whisper the Granger family's inherited dating tips, advice Hermione had learned her whole life and now committed to memory. Based on experience, she knew these tips always came in handy. The holiday slid by faster than anyone expected. By late January, winter was still grinding on, even colder than before, and the snow around Hogwarts had frozen harder. When the Christmas break ended, Seamus decided he would spend at least 3 hours a day in the library. The days at school during the holidays had been too relaxed. Board games in the common room, ice skating, snowball fights on the frozen Quidditch pitch, where Seamus always seemed to be the one getting plastered by snowballs. He'd learned a few techniques for breaking the force after being hit, but he was still always on the losing end of wizard chess and gobstones. Humiliated by the leisure experts, Seamus resolved to outperform them in his studies and to finally catch up on his homework. Madame Pince wasn't exactly delighted. Many of the top students who loved the library had gone home for the holidays. The stacks were quiet, and Seamus found himself alone at a table under the hawk-eyed gaze of the librarian, his heart knocking in his chest. Madame Pince didn't stare at him constantly. She sometimes chatted with the portraits instead. "Violet, thank you for coming to keep me company," she muttered to a portrait as she passed by. Yes, that Miss Know-It-All and her boyfriend didn't stay. They went home for Christmas this year. "I heard Miss Granger plans to work at the ministry. Her boyfriend's off to the Alchemy Research Center." "You're right. So moving. Their sorting ceremony as first years feels like only yesterday. Now they're about to graduate." Seamus, pen in hand, tried to focus on the page before him, but found his eyes drifting. Madame Pince's murmured conversation floated through the library like dust motes. "Who's she talking about?" he wondered, momentarily lost in thought. "It shouldn't be me, right?" Madame Pince and Violet's voices echoed in his head. Seamus Finnegan found himself doodling. 3 tiny turtles in the margin of his potions homework, and 2 little leaves beside his Defense Against the Dark Arts notes. He kept scribbling until he nearly smudged a finished Transfiguration exercise. Only then did he blink back into the present, hastily stowing his parchments, tucking his quill and ink into his pocket, and rising to leave the library. The walk back to the Gryffindor common room should have taken a few minutes. It took him almost half an hour. Sir Cadogan led him up a spiral staircase that circled on, and Seamus landed back in the common room, dazed and distracted. He sat down on a sofa and dozed off. The fire crackled quietly. The sound braided itself into a dream. The dream ran like a fast-forwarded film. For some reason, everyone he'd known at school, everyone but him, suddenly sped through life. They graduated, married, found work, rose in their careers, all in the space of a breath. A class reunion was organized in the Hogwarts library. Everyone agreed to come. Seamus felt absurd, and in the dream agreed to attend. Classmates clustered in animated groups. Loren's face beamed on collectible cards as a legendary wizard with adventure tales and storybooks. Hermione had become director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and was running for minister. Harry was an Auror captain who still played Quidditch and had just won the World Cup. Ron had entered some industry and fathered a swarm of red-haired children who shrieked and chased after him. Even Dean had found his way into a muggle company and used magic to jump into management. Seamus was crouched in a corner with filibuster fireworks when the room fell silent. Madame Pince and Violet's voices threaded through the hush. "Look at that gentleman. Everyone else has achieved something, or at least settled into a contented life. Only he's still the same as when he started." "Who? Who else?" "Mr. Finnegan, with the fireworks." All eyes turned to him. The gaze was heavy and wordless. Madame Pince and Violet's voices lingered in the rafters of the library. "I'm not," Seamus snapped, then woke up. Sunlight slanted through the common room windows. The fire still burned cheerfully. He was drenched in a cold sweat, mouth dry, throat raw. Only his ragged breathing filled the quiet. Footsteps sounded at the portrait hole, and Dean poked his head in. "Weren't you in the library?" Seamus swallowed. "It was quiet. Madame Pince kept staring at me, so I came back early." "Why are you staying here?" "I fell asleep." "Then why are you all sweaty?" "Had a nightmare." "What was it about?" Seamus shut his mouth. The dream was fresh enough that it felt like a warning, maybe a kind of prophecy. He was due to do his divination homework. He knew that prophecies couldn't be revealed to the person concerned, or they tended somehow to come true. He thought of prophets and shook his head. "It's nothing important, but I'm not going back to the library until term starts." "You finally listened to me," Dean said. "I told you, wait until Loren and the others get back. You can borrow their notes." "No, I'm still doing my homework." Dean blinked. Every holiday they promised to reform, to study properly. It never lasted. Now, in 7th year and halfway through, it was too late to bluff. "We got Hagrid's key to the broom closet. We can borrow practice brooms. We're doing a flying snowball fight. You in? Seamus hesitated. The winter sun outside glittered on the snow, bright enough to sparkle in his eyes. Half an hour. I've still got divination homework. Then let's go. The spell of good weather lasted days, and the morning they returned to school, the sky was clear. In the yards of two old houses in Hampstead, a thin glaze of ice traced the veins of leaves, freezing branches into lace. The vendor who sold the trees had been in business for years. The plants were fragile, but the aftercare was reliable. Grandpa Bates, wrapped in a down jacket, crouched to inspect roots while Loren, scarf and gloves on, came outside ready to leave. Grandpa Bates, it's time. Hermione and I are heading back to school. Loren's voice was casual. Going straight to the castle or to the station? Bates asked. Straight to Hogwarts. Then I won't see you off, Bates grumbled. Take care of yourself. Keep regular hours. Eat properly. Understand? What are you talking about? Those are my lines. Take care of Hermione. Keep her on schedule. Make sure she eats. Understand? Bates shot back. Loren smirked and stepped closer. You're almost 18, and you still want a goodbye hug? Bates pretended to be cross, but opened his arms. Loren dropped a quick farewell, kicked the tree trunk, and vanished in a soft shimmer of apparition. Snow rustled down and settled on Bates like a beard and cap, making him look for all the world like a grumpy snowman. At Hogwarts, the gates were slightly ajar, marble boar statues frozen with snow on their backs. Loren pushed the gate open with a disappointed shake of his head. Given what happened 2 years ago, Hogwarts could use better security, he muttered to Hermione as they walked in, not because of respect, but because he found the path not walked for a month oddly satisfying. Footprints crisscrossed the snow, Hagrid's deep impressions undisturbed, others half-buried. They strolled under the humping willow, which stood quiet under its snowy burden. Loren patted the knot, and a shower of snow fell, piling into the shape of a snowman that stared back at them. It's a bit cold, Loren complained, shaking snowflakes from his hair. Hermione brushed the flakes from his shoulders with an exasperated hand and linked her arm with his. Don't dawdle. We're the earliest students back. The rest of the way is long. I don't want it to get dark before we reach the castle, he answered. He had the air of someone making a scene for the pleasure of it. They linked hands as they neared the Quidditch pitch, conversations and shouts carrying across the cold air. Winter shortened the days. By afternoon, Seamus was zipping around on a practice broom, wearing battered, windproof sunglasses rimed with snow. The thrill of a flying snowball fight made him feel invincible. A whistling ball hurtled at him, zing of speed like a bludger. He couldn't dodge in time. He pulled his broom up and took it on the back. Old lesson from many snowball fights. Protect your face and neck at all costs. It didn't sting. He was about to scoop up snow for a counterthrow when two figures crossed the edge of his vision. For a moment, he froze. Loren and Hermione were walking hand in hand toward the pitch. His brain did a double take. Return to school was tomorrow. How were they already back? He glanced at the sinking sun. The light had thinned to orange on the horizon. The sun was almost down. He hadn't been playing that long. The same uneasy rush as in his dreams slid over him. Panicked, he landed hard at the edge of the field, shoved his broom aside, and started for the castle. Dean touched down beside him. What's up? I've got to go do my homework, Seamus said, voice sharp. Dean stared. But they're back. Loren and Hermione are here. Means we can look at their work tonight. No need to rush. I said I'd only play for half an hour. Now I need to use this half hour to do my homework. You've already had 6 half hours. Come on, one more. No, I need this half hour. Dinner was in half an hour, and Dean couldn't see reason. He thought maybe Seamus was feverish from a nap in the common room. Seamus walked off, leaving the ring of sunset and flying snow behind. He thought, absurdly, that Dean would remember his back. Seamus imagined that in 10 years at the library reunion, Dean would still be talking about the lad who insisted on homework. He wiped his snow-scummed sunglasses and hurried on. Up in the divination classroom, the sunset light fell across a polished crystal ball and the fireplace. There was no cloying incense tonight, only the faint, warm tang of sherry. Professor Trelawney sipped, lowered her head, and peered into the ancient crystal, an heirloom from her great-grandmother that, when combined with sherry, opened the eye of foresight. She had tried several predictions for the new divination students this term, and so far none had come true. She needed something suitably vague and grand to keep the class intact. When the sherry bottle was empty, she put quill to parchment and began to write the images that had drifted into her mind, murmuring as she wrote, "These are all guided by the eye of foresight." 7-7. Absence note. I'm heading back to my hometown to slaughter pigs and make sausages. I'm taking a day off. I'll make it up tomorrow. I bow to you, esteemed readers. Hogwarts, Gryffindor Tower. Loren woke on his four-poster in the dormitory. The room was warm and comfortable. An owl hooted faintly outside the window. His roommate Seamus, who had been up studying until midnight, still slept in the bed beside him. Loren tiptoed to the washroom to freshen up and changed into his house robes. The school, oddly, didn't offer 24-hour hot water in winter, something he made a mental note to raise with the headmaster when he could. Hermione had already woken and was sitting on the common room sofa, flipping through a recent Transfiguration magazine. When she heard him coming down the stairs, she looked up and smiled a little. "Good morning." "A bit too early," Loren yawned, then paused, frowning at her mussed hair. "What's wrong?" She blinked. Since classes hadn't started, she hadn't bothered to do much with her hair after waking, and it was a little wild. "Sit still right here." Loren pressed a shoulder, took out an old wooden comb he hadn't used in ages, and began to work through her curls. "Day after day, you're too lazy with your hair. When you're Minister for Magic someday, can you imagine going to work like this? Turning up to meetings with the International Confederation of Wizards and getting called the Bird's Nest Minister by the Daily Prophet? Like the Spout Minister or the Hoof Minister?" Hermione giggled. "Exactly." Loren smiled. He and Hermione both knew the joke. Ferrus Spavin, an unfortunate 19th century Minister for Magic, had once angered a group of centaurs and been publicly kicked, earning the humiliating nickname. Hermione let out a soft hum as the comb's teeth tickled her scalp. Over the years, Loren's hair combing had become familiar ritual. Though she'd grown used to it, the warmth of having him stand behind her still made her feel quietly content. By the time the train had delivered the students to the station, it was dark. The great hall shone with torchlight and candles, and houses buzzed with holiday stories. Some pupils whispered about unfinished homework and swapped Transfiguration essays and charms notes, planning to help one another later in the dormitories. Loren glanced toward the staff table. Not all the professors had arrived. He murmured something to Hermione, rose, and slipped toward the washroom. A few minutes later, he was passing a corridor, shaking a few drops of water from his hands onto the wall, planning to greet Harry and the others and dry his hands on their robes when he returned to the table. Voices from the great hall echoed through the corridors. Behind a pillar at the corner, two figures stood side by side, watching the students with soft smiles. Loren stopped, surprised, and bowed politely. "Good evening, Professor." "Professor McGonagall." "Good evening," McGonagall replied. Loren hesitated, then added, "It's Loren. The feast hasn't started yet. Do come and chat." He wondered if they remembered his detention. He'd heard Seamus mention the night before that Professor McGonagall had stayed at school over the Christmas break. The white-bearded headmaster had not been about, apparently having sent his work to the deputy and taken a holiday. Dumbledore turned at that thought and asked with a smile, "Mr. Filch told me you returned to school early?" "I came back last night," Loren answered. "How was your holiday?" "Fine," he thought for a moment. "Nothing special. No travel. I stayed at home with my family. It was ordinary but peaceful. A simple, happy holiday." Dumbledore stroked his beard and glanced at McGonagall. "I do try to advise Minerva not to stay at school all the time. She should free herself from the busyness of work during the holidays. Work isn't everything." "Is that why you offload your work onto me?" McGonagall shot them both a pointed look and began to move away, but she added, "One more thing, dear Loren. Don't let a pleasant holiday make you forget your detention. Remember to report to Mr. Filch." Loren felt the little bubble of hope pop. There would be no escape. He sighed inwardly and looked back at the headmaster with an attempt at composure. "Professor, how was your holiday?" Dumbledore chuckled. "Gellert invited me to ski in Switzerland. While I was there, I visited some of the Muggles' recent technological achievements. places like the Royal Swiss Academy of Sciences, and institutions associated with things you may have heard of, like the Nobel Prizes. Loren blinked. Do you understand those achievements? Dumbledore's answer was decisive. No, I do not. But many exhibits included brief descriptions. Reading those, one can get a rough sense of such crystallizations of human ingenuity, brilliant, like Ravenclaw's sapphires. He paused, then his tone shifted. Actually, scholars have noticed that unique Muggle ways of thinking are beginning to affect the magical world. Everything from shop promotion methods in Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade to the American Magical Congress's cooperation with Muggle governments over werewolf rights. After Lord Voldemort's defeat, the rhetoric of pureblood supremacy has waned, and academia has started to reconsider the wizard-Muggle relationship. Some have proposed new ideas. What ideas? Loren asked. That wizards and Muggles should communicate and share, Dumbledore said. That magical civilization and technological civilization might merge. That's not a new idea, Loren replied, raising an eyebrow. Even with the Statute of Secrecy, people had discussed it for years. Muggle studies instructors in Britain had long argued that Muggle society, powered by technology, was racing ahead and that wizarding society had fallen behind. Learning from Muggles' systems and ideas could help magical society develop. Loren himself had found scientific thinking useful in his study of alchemy. Even Ilvermorny's educational model borrowed from Muggle universities and had valuable innovations. Dumbledore nodded. It's an old conversation, but it's gained steam. The International Confederation of Wizards will convene soon, and I expect this will be a central topic. Joint handling of werewolf rights, the missile incidents during the war. Both the good and the bad news show that the Statute of Secrecy is becoming harder to maintain. Loren stood looking out over the courtyard at the falling snow and listening to Dumbledore's steady voice. Crookshanks had settled against his feet, his front paws draped over the toe of Loren's shoe, ears drooping as he listened. Dumbledore looked down at the cat and then back at Loren with a gentleness that made Loren feel at ease. Have you spoken with Mr. Quahog? I met him once. Loren was surprised. How did you know? Mr. Quahog wrote to me on Boxing Day asking about you, Dumbledore said after a moment, inquiring about your character, your time here at school, and asking how I view the idea of wizard-muggle integration. And how did you reply? Loren asked. I only returned to the castle yesterday, Dumbledore said, smiling. I haven't decided how to answer him yet. 789. Good sleeping environment. The clock chimed on time. Loren and Dumbledore turned and walked into the Great Hall. Crookshanks watched them go. At this hour, his usual plan, curl up by the Hufflepuff table and scrounge for chicken drumsticks, would normally work, but tonight he had a better option. He stretched, pressed his front paws together, and padded lightly toward the underground stairs. Down in the kitchens, the house elves knew his master, and he could pick whatever he fancied. Sometimes he even managed to pack a few treats for Fang. Actually, I'm not close to Mr. Quahog, Dumbledore was saying as they walked. The American Magical Congress doesn't have the right to demand student records from Hogwarts. Their inquiry was a matter of courtesy. I could write him a brief reply and enclose some archival material. There's no need to tell him about our adventures, is there? What archival material? Loren asked. I asked Professor McGonagall for your transcripts and the commendation certificates from the last few years. I'll make a copy to send to Mr. Quahog. You gave me commendations? That was raised at the staff meeting before the holidays. Severus argued that you're bound to make a name for yourself in the magical world after graduation, so Hogwarts should recognize you while you're still a student. Outstanding alumnus, right? We actually agreed unanimously that, given what you've proven these last few years, repeatedly foiling dark wizard plots, improving and optimizing the Wolfsbane potion, strong exam results, and helping fellow students, you merit both an award for excellent character and a special contribution award. The trophies are already in the display cabinet. You'll see them when you serve your detention. Why am I only hearing this now? Loren asked. Dumbledore blinked. Because after we proposed the commendations, we had to discuss the punishment for your placing alchemical items around the school. That seemed fair enough. They followed the headmaster into the Great Hall. The feast had already begun, and Professor McGonagall stood at the middle of the staff table, delivering the opening speech. Welcome. Welcome back to Hogwarts. The coming months mark the second half of the academic year and a new term in 1998. I hope all students approach their new classes with a fresh outlook. Her voice was steady, controlled, and there was a softness in it that McGonagall rarely showed. The usual sternness had given way to something kinder. It was an opening address with the calm authority of someone meant for leadership. The younger students watched her, then glanced at Dumbledore, who had slid into a seat at the side of the staff table. Some of them exchanged looks that said they already understood the shift. Our deputy is going to be the headmistress. The Gryffindors were practically vibrating with excitement. They'd never listened so intently to an opening speech. As McGonagall cleared her throat to continue, Dumbledore raised his goblet, took a sip of sparkling wine, and, under the table, tugged gently at her sleeve. McGonagall hesitated and then smiled. The list of prohibited items will be discussed after the feast. Now, I declare the feast open. Long live Professor McGonagall, the students shouted, the hall erupting in cheers that rolled and crashed over the tables. Somebody called Headmistress McGonagall, and a few other voices joined in. The Gryffindors craned their necks in excitement, and when their new head looked their way, they dropped their gazes quickly, pretending to be studious. Look at Harry just now. Doesn't he remind you of Draco back then? Someone murmured. Loren turned to Hermione and chuckled. Hermione gave him a withering look. Food appeared on plates, as if by magic. Goblets refilled. Torches and candles along the walls danced in the warm light. It felt like the bright future the teachers and students had been hoping for. Later, back in the dormitory, someone called, "Myrtle's in the prefect's bathroom. Neville, are you still planning to wash?" Loren, dressed in cashmere pajamas with a towel slung over his shoulder, let out a little cloud of steam. He tossed his changed clothes into the laundry basket, took his wand and flicked it at his hair. Small gusts swirled above his head, drying and tidying his hair at the same time. Neville silently gathered his toiletries and padded off to the ensuite washroom. Ever since he'd heard Myrtle frequented the prefect's bathroom, he'd basically given up that privilege. The others in the dorm had their own takes, initial awkwardness, then most of them stopped caring. Loren flopped onto his bed, stretched, and sighed contentedly. Harry and Ron were hunched over work beside him, using examples from both Loren and Neville as guides. A quick glance let them pull useful bits into their heads and write directly onto parchment, skipping tedious copying. Years of practice had made it second nature. Seamus worked more slowly, with textbooks and reference volumes open. When he hit a snag, he consulted the books and, failing that, asked Loren or Neville. His earnestness was admirable. "Loren, this says to add belladonna juice at the appropriate time. When is that?" Seamus asked. "Potions homework? Didn't you opt out of advanced potions?" Loren said. "That doesn't stop me from sitting the potions NWT." Loren raised an eyebrow. "Maybe on exam day Merlin will smile on me, Lady Luck will favor me, and the examiner will let me pass. Stranger things have happened, right?" "Fair enough. When do you add it?" "When the potion is simmering and little bubbles are appearing at the bottom of the cauldron." "How much belladonna should I add?" "Drip it in slowly until the potion changes color." "Slowly, drip," Seamus muttered as he wrote on his parchment. Loren watched the three of them study, their faces lit by candlelight, and felt a little pleased. After a beat, he asked, "When's our next Quidditch match?" "Before Easter," Ron answered without looking up. "Who's it against, Hufflepuff?" "Ravenclaw." Hufflepuff lost their last match. Their seeker was sleepwalking the whole game, didn't even see the snitch. Harry paused with his quill in the air and frowned. "Hey, don't say that. He's new. He doesn't have match experience." Ron waved a hand and went back to his work. "Is that so?" Loren watched their faces and at the right moment added, "Actually, I think their keeper's not so good either. What's his name again?" "Flint. He's the brother of the old keeper. His Quidditch technique isn't spectacular, but he's brilliant at commanding the field. He's the brains of the Hufflepuff team." Ron still didn't look up, but Harry set his quill down. "I think he's too weak in goalkeeping. Brains is just an excuse. Justin says he got the position through connections." Ron finally looked at Harry, frowning. "That's an amateur view." I'm an amateur. I don't want to be rude, but Harry, seekers don't usually take part in those inner field scrums. You only have a surface understanding of tactics. I only have a surface understanding. You just proved it with your comment about Flint. Then your judgment about Hufflepuff's new seeker is just as amateurish. I'm the Quidditch captain. I see this clearly, but you don't understand seekers at all. They went back and forth, perfectly earnest in their obstinacy. Loren listened for a while, then pulled his covers up, said goodnight to Seamus, still bent over his notes, and closed his eyes with a contented smile. Argus Filch evening, February 6. The snow had melted, but a spring chill still bit the air. Loren lingered over dinner longer than usual. Tonight, the first weekend after term began, he had to report to Mr. Filch, the caretaker. The detention was really unpaid labor, scrubbing the trophy room, cleaning washrooms, sweeping courtyards. Filch no longer used corporal punishment and would often work alongside the students assigned to him. He hadn't always been like that. He used to leave pupils to work alone in a room while he went elsewhere, only returning to check on them later. That changed after George and Fred had taken advantage of his absence to steal confiscated contraband. After that, Filch tightened his rules. Detention assignments at Hogwarts weren't fixed. Professors occasionally took charge if they needed extra hands or wanted to help a student from their house, assigning tasks related to their subject, processing potion ingredients, sorting greenhouse fertilizers, marking exam papers. No one volunteered to help Loren this time. Everyone thought he deserved it. He finished his pumpkin pie, savoring the last crumbs, said goodnight to Hermione early, and pushed out of the great hall alone. At the end of the first-floor corridor, he paused at a plain wooden door and knocked. "Who is it?" "Loren Morgan. Enter." Dim, yellow light greeted him. Only a single oil lamp burned from the ceiling. The walls around it had no windows. The room smelled of fried fish. At first, the office seemed narrow and cramped, but a closer look showed it was actually roomy, simply packed with wooden filing cabinets that ate up the space. This was the caretaker's office and Hogwarts' archive of troublesome students. Drawers labeled with names lined the walls. One on the right was even stamped Weasley. Near the desk, a cabinet read, "Confiscated items, highly dangerous." George and Fred had once found the Marauder's map among its contents. "Good evening, Mr. Filch," Loren said. "Loren Morgan." Filch's voice was a dry rasp. He was an old man and a squib, and it showed in everything, rail-thin, hunched, with sparse, messy hair and pale, drawn skin. His cheek muscles had shrunk, his veins twisted beneath slack flesh, and his light-colored eyes protruded slightly. Norris lay coiled on a cushion in the corner, a small porcelain bowl beside her with a few fish bones and an oily rim, the source of the smell. Filch sat behind a dark, square table, flipping through a piece of paper from a professor with bony fingers. He squinted hard at it, his chin trembling. Unauthorized placement of alchemical items in the school. Detention. "I'll be here on time the next 2 weekends," Loren said, nodding. He could see the flicker of the lamp reflected in Filch's eyes. Filch didn't look very closely at the document. He seemed to avoid meeting Loren's gaze. After Loren's last late-night escapade, the evasion felt deliberate. Maybe Filch wanted to keep his distance now. "The next 2 weeks?" Filch muttered, pretending to consult a schedule. Term's only just begun, and with the thaw, the courtyards are a mess to sweep. The washrooms were cleaned before term, so there isn't much else. Only the trophy room needs to be wiped down and dusted. "I'll come with you," Loren said. Filch stood and walked out ahead, Mrs. Norris stretching and padding along beside him. Filch shuffled with a slight limp, dragging his feet slowly. Loren could hear his wheezing breaths. Without the fried fish smell to cover it, there was the unmistakable scent of old age. In front of students, he always seemed brusque and hard, perhaps a shield for his weakness, a way to hide being a squib in a school of witches and wizards. Loren followed in silence, his earlier resistance fading. They climbed to the 4th floor and turned down a corridor lined with suits of armor. The trophy room served as a display area and was never locked. Crystal cabinets held trophies, shields, medals, and statuettes. Lists of past prefects hung on the walls. The exhibits themselves were not particularly dirty, no glaring stains, just a film of dust on the glass cases. Inside, the trophies shone bright, often cleaner than Filch's own office. Filch seemed to hate students making a mess of the castle. He'd scold a Quidditch team for tracking water in after a rain, yet his own rooms were cluttered and his robe worn threadbare. The castle, whatever else about his life, held a sort of sanctity for him. "Let's get started," Filch said. He fetched a metal basin and some towels from a corner. From his sleeve, he pulled a little wooden stick that looked like a wand. Filch aimed it at the basin and, with a ceremonious mutter, said, "Aguamenti." Water sprang into the basin as if by magic, soaking the towels. "Start from here. Stop 10 minutes before lights out. Be here on time yourself the next 2 weekends. You don't need to report to my office." He wrung out 2 towels and handed one to Loren. "Yes, sir," Loren replied, taking it. He glanced at the wand. It was of some unknown wood, polished with tongue oil and well cared for, but there was something about it that suggested its enchantment had faded. It would likely fail after a few more uses. Loren said nothing more and set to work. The trophy room settled into quiet. The soft slide of glass doors, the faint clink of metals on their stands, the wet slap of towels being wrung and wiped. "Mr. Filch," he ventured after a while. "Yes?" "How many years have you worked at Hogwarts?" Loren asked. "Over 20 years. I can't remember exactly." Filch's voice was small. "That's a long time." Loren hesitated, then looked up at the old man a few paces away. "Guarding this castle for so many years, seeing incredible magic close at hand, and never being able to take part. Mr. Filch, do you ever feel despair?" Argus Filch was hunched in the middle of the trophy room corridor, methodically wiping the glass of the display cases. When Loren's question reached him, he stiffened and bent lower over his work. The cases stood in neat rows, crystal clear in the candlelight, holding the honors of generations of pupils. Shields for Quidditch stars, gleaming golden house cups, smaller silver cups, badges, framed development photos. He was polishing a special contribution award. The brass plate at its base read, "Gaspard Singleton, Hufflepuff, 1970 to 1977. Gaspard Singleton had been a Hufflepuff prefect, excellent at potions and herbology, poor at Transfiguration, the sort who'd sat 7 NEWT exams and come away with 7 certificates. After leaving school, he'd invented a self-stirring cauldron and been famous enough to be mentioned in History of Magic while he was still alive. He'd even been a recent Wizard of the Month. Filch had been around this castle for nearly 30 years, polishing these same trophies countless times. He knew the names on their bases and the stories they represented better than some of the professors. For the first few years after he'd taken over from Apollyon Pringle, when he was alone, he would sometimes let his mind wander. If he'd been born with magic, if a letter had come for him at 11, if he'd had a wand and gone to school like those boys and girls, would Argus Filch's name ever have been engraved here? It had never happened. Filch was a squib. Since the turn of the century, the Ministry had done its best to steer squibs into respectable Muggle lives. With its help, Filch had had a decent job in the Muggle world once. He'd left for work in the morning, come back at night, spent weekends mowing the lawn and cleaning the house, and occasionally had a pint at the pub. It was safe, comfortable, and respectable. But it had been dull. Muggle lives were predictable. Fireplaces warmed rooms, fountain pens were cold and uncooperative. Nothing vanished or appeared without explanation. Filch had hated it. He knew there was another world where fireplaces led to villages hundreds of miles away, where quills were soft and alive, where things floated under summoning charms and a weed could, if somehow bewitched, charge like a bull. That world had shut him out. The knowledge of what he couldn't have felt like 1,000 sharp claws tearing at him. He had written to Dumbledore, pleading for work in that other world rather than pretending to be happy in the Muggle one. Being caretaker at Hogwarts, he told himself, was the nearest he could get to belonging. Many squibs made similar choices. They were fewer in number, but not unheard of. Mrs. Fig in the Order of the Phoenix, a rugby player on the Scottish team, a delivery man in Diagon Alley, Old Jim at the Hogsmeade Bakery, squibs found ways to live between the two worlds. He kept polishing in silence. His bony right hand gripped the cloth tight, rubbing at the inscription until his fingers paled. Loren stood across from him, wiping without haste, neither perfunctory nor overly meticulous. "As a squib who can't do magic," Loren said, his tone even, "being the caretaker at Hogwarts must be hard. Students don't even look carefully at the list of banned items. One disguise, and you can't tell a trick from a potion. You can't smell whether something from Weasley's Wizard Wheezes is perfume or a love potion. At night, you get fooled by disillusionment charms and invisibility cloaks, and have to rely on Madame Norris. If they break the rules in the corridor, one flick of a charm and they're out of sight. You must see it all the time. He sounded more curious than cruel. Mr. Filch, what belief has kept you at this job for 30 years? You wouldn't understand, Filch muttered, voice rough. You've been lucky. You know magic from the start. You can't feel what it is to be a squib. Rather than sink into an ordinary muggle life, I'd rather live miserably in the magical one. Because once you've seen that world, ordinary life is unbearable, Loren said, not arguing. He kept wiping. After a pause, he asked quietly, but suppose you'd never seen it at all, born to ordinary parents, never sent a letter, having to make your own supper by hand instead of waving a wand. Would you still ache like this? Madame Norris had settled on top of the nearest display case at some point, tail curled around her paws, watching them with bright, unblinking eyes. Filch stopped. He set the trophy back in its case and left the glass door half open. He stared at his reflection and for a long moment made no answer. I don't know, he said at last. Loren didn't press him. The corridor quieted. Filch walked to the next case, opened it, and lifted out the trophy inside. It was a special contribution award, new, polished to a mirror shine, dustless, recently placed. His eyes slid to the engraving on the base, and he went very still. Loren Morgan, Gryffindor, 1991 to 1998. 792. About Quidditch. It was late February, a Saturday, just past 11 in the morning. Loren stepped out of the Great Hall after filing his detention slip with Professor McGonagall and incidentally adding his name to the archival record for his Special Service Award. A great deal of administrative data had come back from Ilvermorny, research on academic magic, and a more systematic approach to record-keeping, and Hogwarts was following suit. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout were already planning to reorganize their clubs into research groups, turning club members into formal researchers. Deputy Headmaster Snape wanted to convert the Slytherin chamber into an archive to house research records. Even though McGonagall had not officially taken the headship, the staff's atmosphere had shifted markedly. The contrast was obvious enough to make a certain former head a little red-faced. Welcome to the second half of this season's Hogwarts Quidditch, the announcer boomed over the pitch. Today's teams, Hufflepuff and Slytherin. Losers' bracket matches are often the most intense. Those knocked down are burning with the will to redeem themselves. The winner of today's match will re-challenge the winner's bracket and still have a shot at the Quidditch Cup. Who will break through and claim victory? Let us witness it together. It was a Quidditch day, the losers' bracket match between Slytherin and Hufflepuff. Loren was a few minutes late and missed the start. He climbed into the stands, hunting for Hermione as he glanced at the scoreboard and listened to the students around him dissect the play. Most people assumed the result was a foregone conclusion. Even McGonagall, a Quidditch fan, seemed less excited than usual. Slytherin had their old seeker, Malfoy, back in the starting lineup. After last semester's failure, the team's morale was high, and they'd trained relentlessly through the cold. Hufflepuff, by contrast, looked bleak. Their seeker was a newcomer this year, and their keeper's game didn't match his decision-making. Their only real advantage was attitude. The players were still laughing and upbeat even as the match started. A cluster of Hufflepuff students nearby were whispering together. Ernie, do you think the Slytherins could come down with a sudden bout of stomachache? Like, be stuck in the loo, and then we win? Justin squinted at the formidable Slytherin line and asked. Ernie's eyes went wide. Merlin, Justin, don't tell me you poisoned them. Maybe. Hannah sighed. There are potions that could do the trick, she admitted. Loren almost laughed at how conspiratorial the usually upright Hufflepuff sounded. He kept eavesdropping until he felt someone watching him. He turned to find Hermione sitting quietly behind him, having apparently been watching him for some time. Players, prepare, Madame Hooch called. She blew her whistle, and the game took off. Slytherin attacked fiercely, and within half an hour, Hufflepuff was beaten. The announcer's declaration sent the stands into a buzz. Some blamed the Hufflepuff keeper for fumbling. Others praised Draco Malfoy. The boy was almost as fast as Harry Potter, they said, and many grumbled that Hufflepuff would finish last again. Ron, standing nearby, replayed Slytherin's tactics in his head. Harry watched Malfoy with a frown. Ron moved closer, analyzing. Around them, fans bickered about responsibility. "This time it's the Seeker who lost it, right?" someone said. "He's new," another protested. "He's not that new. He's had a few matches." Losing isn't all his fault. It is his fault. When Malfoy found the snitch, what was he doing? Staring at Goyle across the field. Besides the 150 points from the snitch, wasn't the keeper at fault too? Harry's tone was thin and prickly, as if the argument got under his skin. Loren glanced back at the pitch. Slytherin players were jubilant. The Hufflepuffs forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The graduating players, especially, looked hollow. This might be the last time they wore those scarves into the stands. The Hufflepuff team surged forward to greet their supporters. Ernie wrapped an arm around one of the older players and punched the other's chest in mock congratulation. "Finally, you can stop the brutal training. Take it easy on weekends." "We still have to train the new ones," someone replied. "Well, a little easier at least. Party in the common room tonight. Consider it your retirement ceremony." The Hufflepuff players grinned, waved grave, and wandered to the changing rooms to take off uniforms they might never wear again. For the past 7 years, Quidditch prestige had belonged to Gryffindor. Harry Potter had joined as a first year and helped the team win the cup 6 years running. This year ought to have been his too. But the other players were not merely scenery. They had sweated through stormy practices and argued tactics into the small hours. Now it was over. Loren turned to Hermione with a crooked grin. "What do you say we sneak into the Hufflepuff common room tonight and crash their party?" Hermione rolled her eyes. "I don't care about the party, but the professor will give us an extra 2 weeks of detention." Loren fell silent, logical and utterly unanswerable. Time leapt forward to April. The month came with constant drizzle that melted the last ice and sped Scotland towards summer. The homping willows showed fresh shoots. Green grass pushed up through the paths, buds dotted the shrubs, and even a few insects could be heard in the forbidden forest. It was Sunday, April 5th, 1 week before Easter. Around 10 in the morning, a boy in a Gryffindor robe left the hall and hurried along the grounds toward the pitch. It didn't take long to figure out where he was headed. Years of Quidditch practice make your feet remember the way. Harry knew the team had no scheduled practice that day, so Ron's secretive trip to the pitch seemed odd. He hid behind a door and watched Ron walk away. Lately, Ron had been strange, missing after dinner, not around the dormitory or common room, absent from wizard chess and gobstones, skipping tabletop Quidditch. He'd even been shirking the one task he used to enjoy least, sorting the broom gear in the shed. Ron used to joke about being captain. If he still had to fetch equipment, he might as well not be captain at all. Now he'd suddenly changed. Curious, Harry slipped away, trailing Ron at a distance until he reached the changing rooms. Voices drifted out. They were mostly reserve players, boys who might only join the starting line after the current seniors graduated, some who might never see the pitch at all. The captain was running them through confrontation drills with another house. "Individual practice lacks real opposition," Ron said. "You get too used to the people you know. That's why I've been giving you confrontational training with Ravenclaw. Don't treat it like a chore." Cedric from Hufflepuff even found a girlfriend, Cho Chang, during training. "Don't tell Ginny, though." Harry felt a flash of something sharp when Ron mentioned Cho. He remembered how he'd liked her once. "So? How was the practice? Did anyone give you a hard time?" Ron's voice steadied as the room brightened with teasing and chatter. "Shacklebolt, don't look so glum. After we graduate, the team will be yours. It's a good time to get used to other styles. Now, quick profiles of the other teams. Ravenclaw's quick and light. Not the strongest offense or defense, but their transitions are fast. If you let them set the rhythm, they'll lead you about. Slytherin is all attack at any cost. Marcus even argued for bending rules back then. As long as they score, everything's fair play. It becomes almost like dueling. Hufflepuff hasn't settled yet. When Cedric captained them, everyone had rock-solid basics and their play was steady and honest. It seems plain, but that steadiness puts pressure on you. Harry stayed where he was, listening. He didn't take offense at Ron's light jab. Instead, he felt a small, warm pride that Ron, the boy who'd first become captain because of a prank, had matured into someone who could lead with this calm. "It's been half a day of confrontation training," Ron said. "Well, anything useful?" There was more banter. Someone asked for counter tactics. Someone else complained some captains trained the team until they were sick. Ron quickly parried, claiming his sessions were gentler than the old captain's thunderstorm drills. When Captain Wood was around, Ron said with a mock cough, "We trained until we needed Madame Pomfrey's notes." He changed the subject smoothly and promised to go over tactics before graduation. "When you take over," he told them, "it's okay to lose the first few matches. You'll be finding your style. The Gryffindor team isn't just one lion. Each player has to be a lion. Lions are also pack animals." A boy asked what would happen if they couldn't manage. Ron smiled. "If you can't, you can't, but I'll help you try." Harry lingered a few minutes more, then left quietly. Malfoy had indeed been impressive this season. Something in his family had changed him, smoothing out his impetuosity and giving him a new cool that suited the Malfoy name. In the match against Hufflepuff a few weeks earlier, he'd set traps that fooled even older heads. Harry felt confident. He'd seen enough to trust his own judgment. Later, Loren pushed open the trophy room door and led Hermione inside. He pointed to a trophy in a glass case near the wall. "This is my special service award," he said, pleased. "My name's on the base. Someday they'll make students scrub in here for detention, and my name will be there for them to read." "I remember Lord Voldemort got this trophy," Hermione said, walking down the aisle and stopping at an older cup. "Here, Tom Riddle. Slytherin, 1938 to 1945, Loren read aloud, impressed. "Dumbledore and McGonagall are really principled. They didn't rescind it. Many Special Service Award winners ended up in Azkaban, and the school didn't tear trophies away either," Hermione added with a quick sideways glance that made Loren grin a little. "Did you bring me here just to see that?" Loren felt a touch embarrassed. He glanced around the room. "Any plans for the Easter holidays?" "Professor Lupin's had his baby. He invited us to his home," Hermione answered. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it Easter holiday. Hogsmeade. It was a rare, perfect morning in mid-April. The sun was already high and warm at 9 o'clock, gentle without being oppressive, as if Scotland had finally shrugged off its rainy season. The mist that usually clung to the forbidden forest and the lake had thinned into a scintillating morning fog, catching the sun in tiny rainbows. A faint coolness lingered on the grounds outside the castle, making the air pleasant and the day ideal for an outing. Loren unwrapped 2 strawberry lollipops, popped one into his mouth, and handed the other to Hermione, taking a bite out of his as they walked out of the school gate. He muttered under his breath, chewing. "I still don't understand why a respectable professor would name his child Teddy." Hermione, candy tucked between her teeth, rolled her eyes. "I still don't understand why a respectable student would associate that perfectly normal name with a dog breed." "You said that." "I didn't. You were grumbling about it for 3 hours yesterday." They drifted on in their quiet bickering, the 2 voices dissolving into the sunlight and the mist. Dew still clung to the flowers lining the path, and bees and fairies hovered above the stamens, silvering in the early light. It was Easter. Only a few people had permission to leave the grounds for the holiday week. Harry and Ginny had been up early, thrilled about the newborn and eager to visit, while Ron had overslept and lagged behind. A handful of students were headed toward Hogsmeade too, some on leave, some visiting relatives in the village. Passing faces were familiar but unnamed. They exchanged distant nods. The street crowds were just the right size. Not busy, not empty. People walked and paused, joked and teased, discussing baby names, getting a playful punch from an embarrassed friend, light and cheerful. They reached Hogsmeade around 9:30. The trees were hung with enchanted candles, unlit for now, and shop signs were strung with ribbons in a jumble of colors, some leftover Christmas red, some fresh pastels. Honeyduke's windows were filled with Easter displays, painted eggs of every size and color. Chocolate shells brushed with thick frosting hinted at secret fillings known only to those brave enough to break them open. Loren peered into the window and whispered to Hermione, "Whatever kind of egg that is, I'm sure it won't hatch an Easter bunny." Hermione glanced at him. "Rabbits are mammals, Loren. They don't hatch from eggs." He kept squinting at the displays anyway, the way a boy inspects a classroom experiment. They wandered down the main street past the post office, then turned into a quieter lane lined with small houses. Here the decorations were sparse. Melted wax from old candles clung to branches. Lawns were tidy enough for egg hunts, but there weren't the same ribbons or fanfare. From inside, voices drifted out. The sharp, brisk tones of housewives and the low, sleepy replies of men who had not yet shaken off their beds. A few preschool children were gathered on a small slope, rolling red-painted eggs and comparing whose survived the tumble. 10 minutes later, they were at Remus Lupin's cottage. "Good morning, Professor Lupin," they called, knocking on the door. "Happy Easter, and congratulations on your baby." Harry burst out as the door opened. "Good morning," Lupin said with a tired, polite smile. When his gaze fell on Loren's bright, curious face, his smile faltered into a faint wince. "Hogwarts didn't have a biology class for this," he sighed. "Hagrid should have taught you something about the basics. Male wizards can't get pregnant, just as male magical creatures don't." "Well, actually, some animals can," Loren cut in, watching the cottage's windows and eaves with that clinical curiosity of his. Lupin waved him through. The yard might not rival a pure-blood manor, but it was roomy, almost villa-sized, and showed a mingling of Muggle design and wizarding make-do. Underground drains and empty conduits laid out like the family had simply left space for an electrical grid they would never plug into. Harry and Ginny barreled into the living room, cheeks flushed. "You two are late," Harry scolded. "Come see him. He's only days old. He's fascinating, ugly, and adorable all at once." Loren and Hermione exchanged a look. "Is it safe?" Hermione asked. "A 2-day-old's immune system is so fragile. What if he picks up something?" Lupin laughed softly. "Vaccines and viruses are the worries of Muggles. Wizards have other ways." He added more seriously, "We had healers in from St. Mungo's. They said the child is too young for a definitive diagnosis. The organs aren't fully developed." Healers who've worked at the New York Werewolf Hospital say lycanthropy isn't passed genetically, but some Muggle experts insist that because it's transmissible through bodily fluids, hereditary transmission can't be ruled out. "Tonks seems fine, though. She's well." "Which is what reassures you?" Loren asked. Harry and Ginny crowded forward to poke at the baby in his crib. They trailed fingers over the tiny nose, marveling at the soft, dimpled fingers and the pumpkin-pale cheeks. Tonks stood nearby in fluffy pink pajamas, hair still a riotous flame of pink, cheeks a little swollen, looking every bit like the young woman she was, tired but radiantly pleased. Harry and Ginny drew back when she gave them a look. "I always wanted a younger sibling," Ginny was saying, linking her arm through Tonks's. "My 6 older brothers." She trailed off into a fond, whining laugh. Tonks laughed too. "I had one. I'm not trying for a huge brood. For me, the pregnancy was the worst. Months of restrictions, friends covering for me at work. Kingsley pulled me off field work. By the 7th month, I wasn't even training recruits. Remus fussed like he was the one going through it. I hid at my mum's for a while. Then they came and dragged me back." She shook her head and smiled. "What kind of parents are they, fussing so much?" She chatted casually, letting the month's worth of nerves evaporate into jokes. Loren watched, interested. Tonks's eyes softened when they slid to the baby, and for a moment a private smile lit her face. Loren stepped closer to the crib. The infant, Teddy, everyone was calling him, was red and wrinkled in that newborn way, his eyes still unfocused, a fine down of hair on his scalp. He was, by all accounts, ugly cute. Loren found himself whispering the name softly. The baby's fingers twitched. There was a sudden, brief flash. Loren's vision caught something crystalline blue in the child's aura, a shimmering kernel of magic. "Is he all right?" came a small, tense voice at his shoulder. Loren turned to see Lupin standing very close, unusually pale. As a member of the Order and Hogwarts Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Lupin had invited Loren here, largely because of what people said about the sort of sight Loren had, how he could perceive magic directly, sometimes even something like the shape of a soul. If anyone might make a careful judgment about the child's condition, it was Loren. Lupin's face was taut. The healers said they can't be sure yet, he said quietly. They say the child's systems are immature. The healers who work with werewolves say lycanthropy doesn't transmit genetically. Muggle doctors worry about bodily fluid transmission. But Tonks looks fine, so that gives me hope. Loren looked at the baby again, then at Lupin. For wizards, traits aren't like Muggle genes, he said slowly. Magical inheritances often pass by magic itself, not by DNA. Magic shows echoes across generations, Parselmouths, affinities for certain magics, sudden gifts like legilimency. Lupin's hand tightened on the crib. So, Teddy, his voice broke. Yes? He's inherited something from his mother, Loren said plainly. Not lycanthropy. Lupin's relief was visible and immediate. For a moment he swayed as if his knees might give out, fingers digging into the railing. You mean? Yes, Loren said. He's inherited Tonks's metamorph magus ability. It's a very unusual and powerful form of magic. Lupin's face changed in a dozen tiny ways at once. Astonishment, joy, and almost childlike relief. For someone who had spent months worrying that his son might be cursed with lycanthropy, the truth was a gift and a new kind of fear. He let out an odd, short laugh and then, unable to keep the emotion entirely in check, his eyes shone. Loren watched him, half amused and half sympathetic. Lupin's jaw worked. He tried to compose himself and managed a small, stunned smile. Oh, Tonks, Loren called, loud enough that the conversation around the crib stilled. I have good news. Easter holiday, off campus, and the dark arts defense professor actually wants to give me detention. Loren stood at the edge of the lawn, shaking his head and muttering. He didn't mention lycanthropy directly, but his carefully chosen words carried a teasing edge. He was watching a little spectacle unfold, and it was working. Remus was red-faced and furious, Tonks blushing and delighted, and the professor who'd tried to take a personal grudge too far had been promptly dissuaded. For the rest of the afternoon, Remus and Tonks oversaw the food. Harry and Ginny took turns watching the cradle, and Loren, with Hermione at his side, played the part of polite host. Their closest friends had already visited on the day the baby was born. Tonks's parents, a few Hogwarts colleagues, the Blacks. This gathering was an extension, invitations sent to ministry colleagues and members of the Order who hadn't been able to come before. Only a handful accepted. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Mad-Eye Moody, Emmeline Vance. Loren and Hermione exchanged a few greetings with familiar faces until Tonks appeared from the kitchen and took over the hosting. The smell from the kitchen deepened as more guests arrived in the courtyard. Tonks, Remus, Elphius, and Daedalus couldn't make it. Asked me to send their regards. They'll call another time. Emmeline Vance, still sharp and capable, had come straight from ministry work. Mad-Eye shuffled up, leaning on his cane, looking older than anyone remembered. His hair had gone white, part of his nose was missing, and the loose skin and wrinkles took the edge off his old fierceness. He paused to stare at the rubbish bin absurdly, then blinked and limped closer. A healthy lad, eh? Moody kept his distance from the crib, as if afraid his face might frighten the baby. Yes, Harry said easily. His name's Teddy. Harry loved the child fiercely, but wore a stern public face, catching and relishing every reaction. He let the story take its course. Loren says some traits can be inherited magically, he told Moody. Teddy's inherited Tonks's metamorph magus ability. Moody frowned, one mechanical eye glinting faintly blue as he tapped his cane. He'll make a good auror, he grunted, then shuffled off. If Tonks uses this right, she's new, but he left the rest unsaid. Harry kept smirking as he watched him go, already thinking of the next prank he could play. He shepherded the late arrivals into the nursery with mock solemnity. Be careful not to wake him, and everyone filed past to see the baby. Tonks watched them, smiling but a little quiet. Loren stood back and watched her watch the room. Hermione had half an ear on the conversation about ministry staffing. Bertha Jorkins and Percy Weasley had come in their ministry robes. It seemed they'd been on duty even on the holiday. Hermione listened as the older Auror-turned officials discussed rotations and promotions. Jorkins, whose memory charm ordeal had curiously resulted in a string of department transfers and later an appointment as the minister's assistant, had amassed a trove of experience and secrets that had propelled her into a senior post. With the ministry purge, those secrets had become political capital. Percy, for his part, was being groomed to be the minister's assistant and was rotating through departments while the new minister settled in. All matters are moving to their final stages, one said. We expect Madam Bones to take office before the next oral recruitment. You need to show Madam Bones what you can do, Percy, Bertha advised. You could be promoted to undersecretary or recommended for the Wizengamot. Thank you. I'll do my best, Percy answered earnestly. Jorkins had meant to tease him, but he took her words at face value and thanked her sincerely, leaving her expression a little complicated. Loren caught Jorkins's eye and waved her over. Loren, Hermione, long time, she said as she approached. Miss Jorkins, I wanted to speak with you about something, Loren said with a smile. About a business matter. Jorkins raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Later, the scene cut sharply to the locked corridors of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. The restricted ward was keyed down in a way St. Mungo's rarely was. A witch was in labor in an intensive care delivery room. Senior healers from every relevant department were on standby, and an Auror team, personally led by Minister Scrimgeour, waited outside. These Aurors were veterans, men and women who had seen 2 wizarding wars, who had watched friends and family fall to Death Eaters. They had not been expected to take on missions like this anymore, but when the ministry called, they came. Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy stood together in the corridor, hands clasped, faces tight with worry. Everyone present knew the woman in labor by name, Bellatrix Lestrange, the last Death Eater awaiting trial. She had been arrested after years in hiding. The trial had been delayed because she was pregnant. Who the father was remained a question everyone feared to ask aloud. Her waters have broken, someone cried, and the ward erupted into controlled frenzy. Healers checked Mother and Foetus, assistants cast revealing charms, Aurors braced for every contingency. For half an hour it felt fragile and urgent, until at last a clear newborn wail split the air. When the healers in the delivery team filed out, their leader's face was wet with sweat but calm. Mother and daughter are safe. No complications, she announced. A collective exhale moved through the corridor. The Dean of St. Mungo's turned to the ministry representative, Mr. Malfoy, and Minister Scrimgeour. We'll remain on standby outside, he said. The patient has been stabilized. Thank you for your work, Scrimgeour said flatly. We'll escort her back to the ministry. They entered the sealed delivery ward. No windows, sealed medicine cabinets, and the faint, unplaceable tang that clung to such rooms. Candle-filled crystal bubbles drifted on the ceiling. On the bed, Bellatrix and her newborn lay in a heavy, drugged sleep, the draught of living death keeping both mother and child tranquilly under. Bellatrix looked almost ordinary in the soft hospital light, loose white gown, a full, tired face with hair smoothed back. The months of confinement and rest had softened some of the harshness that Azkaban and her madness had once carved into her features. Narcissa stood at the bedside, lips moving. It was as if the sister she had remembered quietly reasserted itself, if only for a moment. The baby was beautiful, well-formed, pink and peaceful, little wisps of hair. Scrimgeour's face held nothing. We'll escort her to the ministry, he said. There will be a public trial tomorrow morning in courtroom 10. The child will be placed in the care of Mr. and Mrs. Malfoy. She will not be allowed to leave the country without permission, and she will be required to have annual confidential checkups at St. Mungo's. Mr. Scrimgeour, Narcissa began, voice small. Can Bellatrix see her when she wakes? Scrimgeour did not soften. We cannot risk it. We cannot guarantee she would not use any hidden dark arts on the child. Dark magic is stranger than we can imagine. We do not know the full extent. The current plan is the result of Dumbledore's best efforts. The Wizengamot originally ruled for expulsion from the country, never to return. Narcissa's hands tightened around Lucius's. He shook his head minutely and mouthed, "Let it be. We have no objections," he whispered. The ministry will classify all relevant files as top secret, Scrimgeour continued. All St. Mungo's staff who are informed will keep this confidential. The mother's crimes will not be allowed to affect the child's life more than necessary. And the child's identity? Lucius asked. That is for you to decide, Scrimgeour said. You may present the child as an orphan you adopted or as your own. The ministry will not interfere with the specifics of the upbringing. She is too special, Narcissa said softly. It's better if she has normal parents. We are too old. Lucius hesitated, then nodded. Let him be Draco's child. I will name him. Delphi Malfoy, Narcissa finished. They stood there a moment longer, looking at the sleeping mother and child, the candlelight blowing softly above them. Outside, the corridor hummed with the quiet efficiency of the hospital and the tense vigilance of the Aurors. The next morning's trial would begin a chain of decisions that could not be undone, and for now they carried a fragile, secret life into the uncertain world. The moon was bright, and the surface of the lake shimmered. Oars cut through the water, sending ripples racing outward. The starlight and moonlight were sharp tonight, making the black lake look almost transparent. Hermione sat in a narrow wooden boat, surrounded by ripples and reflected light. Hogwarts and the Forbidden Forest had settled into the hush of night. Mist rose from the water, and silver washed over the grounds, as if the whole world wore a thin, ethereal veil. 7 years ago, on the night they first arrived at Hogwarts, they had crossed the Black Lake by boat too. Hermione couldn't remember whether the moon had been this clear that night. Time folded in on itself. Her eyes took in the present, while her mind drifted over memories of the past, leaving her strangely unmoored. The oar made a crisp splash. Loren's familiar voice came from beside her. "What are you thinking about?" "A little nostalgic," she said. She turned from the distant view. Under the pale moon and the lake's reflections, his face looked striking. He was chewing an orange-flavored lollipop, watching the water with that same distracted interest. He always loved the way the ripples moved. It was so like him. Even though it was late when they'd returned from Hogsmeade, he'd been struck by the beauty of the moon and impulsively dragged her to the Black Lake for a row. There had been no plan. He'd plucked a few leaves, conjured a little wooden boat and oars, and let them drift wherever they pleased. After years of knowing him, Hermione had grown used to his unusual gifts, his advanced alchemy, his dueling skill, but the most vivid memories were the ordinary ones. Him dozing off in class, chatting and combing his hair in the common room, wielding a spatula in the kitchens, or sparking some tall tale at random. When had such a grand plan started forming in Loren's mind? Recalling his conversation with Jorkins earlier that day, Hermione still felt a little dazed. Loren seemed to read her thoughts. "I had the germ of the idea early on," he said quietly, "but it really took shape the night of the Quidditch World Cup." "Because of what happened to Mr. Roberts?" she asked. "Roberts was only the catalyst," Loren replied. "The deep, irreconcilable tensions between Muggles and wizards are the nourishment that let the idea grow." "No wonder the Merperson elder wanted to see you before he died," Hermione murmured. She sat still, staring out over the water as if sensing a new era on the horizon. A hippogriff in the Forbidden Forest beat its wings and tried to reach the moon, then, finding it out of reach, turned and plunged back into the trees, cutting a silver trail through mist. Another swell rose on the lake, this time not from an oar but from the giant squid surfacing, half its head breaking the water. Its huge dark eyes regarded them for a long moment before it sank again, sending another ripple across the surface. It had been worried about the students and left only when assured there was no danger. A gentle creature, Hermione thought. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Go over it with me again," she said softly. "There are parts I don't understand." Loren pursed his lips and thought. Thinking she might be cold, both a warm-blooded human and conveniently a living hot water bottle, he wrapped an arm around her and drew her closer. "Do you remember the story I told you that sunrise in Florida?" he asked. Hermione nodded. A few strands of hair brushed Loren's nose, making him smile. "The history of wizards is divided into 4 eras," she recited. "Magical creatures form a collective macroscopic consciousness. When magical civilization stagnates, that consciousness appears to guide wizards out of their impasse through prophecies, expanding the bounds of magical society. We're between the 3rd and 4th eras. Wizards will absorb technological thought and create a new, more prosperous age, but with a deeper crisis underneath." "Miss Know-It-All has an excellent memory," Loren said, inhaling the faint scent of her hair. "Magical civilization has lasted thousands of years. Many legendary wizards left behind tools and secrets, and through various coincidences, those things converged in my hands like pieces of a puzzle." "What do you mean?" Hermione asked. "Abraham left instructions for refining the Philosopher's Stone. In the past, chosen wizards interpreted that book, learned alchemy, and combined it with their own talents to refine stones with different effects, like Nicholas Flamel's gold and longevity. Professor Snape's resurrection could be considered a variation. My reading of Abraham's book felt guided by a higher dimensional magical consciousness, syncing with my own thoughts. Be specific, she urged. At first, the book led me toward a stone with exceptional properties, and that path brought me to Bloody Mary. Later, we found that hand mirror in Dean Forest, and on the cruise ship we encountered Dementors and obtained a Dementor stone, something that channels fear. Had everything followed the original thread, my stone might have had to do with dreams or emotions. Hermione thought of the mirror and nodded. So you studied Dementors and Boggarts, using fear as an entry point to explore soul-body connections. If that mirror had been perfected, it could have become a new kind of philosopher's stone, one that manipulates the mind. Loren frowned. Sounds like a dark wizard scheme, something despicable like Hellbow. That's not the point. Keep going. Hermione bumped his cheek playfully. He couldn't resist her and forgave the jab. Then the direction of the book's guidance shifted. I'm not sure why. Maybe the serpent diagrams pointing to Slytherin, maybe Morgan Le Fay's magic in my blood, maybe talking with Daisy Dotteridge in that space-time rift. Or maybe it was just the realization that technological and magical civilizations were on a collision course. Certain ideas took root, and that macroscopic magical consciousness started to resonate with my thoughts. His dark eyes reflected silver moonlight. His voice softened, as if blending with it. Hermione tilted her head and squeezed his hand. The book changed in a way I can hardly describe. At first, it only carried my mind to witness small things, the Shoemaker-Levy comet hitting Jupiter, then to drift through the stars to unimaginable distances. By the last time I interpreted it, it even transported me countless light years to witness the answer that consciousness, merged with my own thought, had produced. The answer for resolving the future's irreconcilable conflicts. The promised land of magic, Hermione breathed. Loren held her hand, emotion threading his voice. In the real world, my magic grew at an astonishing rate. Each interpretation was a magical awakening. The growth became exponential. In just a few years, I went from an ungraduated student to a wizard of a caliber comparable to Dumbledore or Voldemort. Such a rapid change had never happened before. Flamel took centuries to develop his stone. His magic reached an inherent limit. That's when I began to suspect something was wrong. I thought it was because of Morgan Le Fay, Hermione said. It was, Loren admitted. But the macroscopic magical consciousness itself is not a true intelligence with an independent, objective form. It's a conglomerate of countless magical creatures' consciousnesses. It can't directly affect reality, only guide the magical world to prosper within limited bounds. The power I possess is amplified by Morgan Le Fay's bloodline. It draws down celestial phenomena and space-time's blessings. And then, Hermione asked, I started to pay attention deliberately and realized the conditions to enact a plan were aligning. You know what happened next. His gaze dropped to her. I found Merlin's remnant space-time magic in the Department of Mysteries. It inspired me, and I combined that with my research on Dementors and Boggarts. From that, I proposed a new theoretical basis for spatial displacement and began designing new devices. He hesitated. The idea is to unite the American Magical Congress and the British Ministry of Magic and to put forward a compulsory resolution at this summer's International Confederation of Wizards. With the resources of pure-blood families, we would promote a new kind of spatial displacement device worldwide. Using the basic theory of soul and body, we could identify beings with magic, and with my consciousness and the astrological coordinate magic uncovered at Ilvermorny, determine destinations. In short, carry all magical life to a promised land before the new era arrives. Hermione's eyes widened. Though she'd grasped fragments earlier that day, seeing the plan laid out in full made her heart beat faster. Ripples spread across the lake, and the moonlight shimmered with them. For a moment, a whisper from a memory slipped through her mind. Please, you, collect 6 books, then faded. She forced herself back to the conversation. Does Dumbledore know about this plan? I haven't told him, Loren said, but I think that old man certainly suspects something. Hermione frowned but didn't press that point. How long will the whole plan take? What if people object? How can you be sure the living conditions over there will be suitable? How should I know? Loren answered, half exasperated. I'm still a student. My main job is study and exams. I occasionally deal with Lord Voldemort in my spare time, and I tinker with alchemy when I can. How could I account for every contingency? The new spatial device isn't even finished yet. There are production problems to solve. But the International Confederation is only 3 months away, Hermione said. Then we don't finish in time, he shrugged. There's always the next conference. No need to rush, unless the merpeople force our hand. They're in a hurry. If we wait too long, they could become endangered. So what will you do? She asked. If there's a problem, consult the headmistress, Loren said. They floated in silence for a while. The moon slid behind the hills and the sky pale with dawn. A red sun rose on the horizon. After watching the sunrise, they rode back to the castle. Morning light poured over the grounds, tinged with gold. The outer stone walls of Hogwarts bore mottled patterns and weathered carvings. Some towers were hewn from single masses of rock rooted deep in the earth. Time had etched its history into the castle. By late April, spring was in full bloom. Easter had ended, and the last Quidditch match of the year was about to begin. Gryffindor versus Slytherin, as always. Loren had tried to speak to Professor McGonagall about his request to sit in the commentator's box, the first Quidditch match he had watched from a box, and 7 years had passed in a blink. The once naive boy was now of graduation age. For this final school match, he had only one wish, to sit in the commentary box again. McGonagall had been unmoved and refused outright. The stadium's roar was the same as every final. Banners with roaring lions and hissing snakes waved from the stands. Professors sat in the front row. McGonagall and Snape exchanged a few clipped words and a mutual smirk. Flitwick and Sprout listened, their expressions slightly strained. Only Dumbledore smiled openly as he watched the teams warm up. The players still eyed each other with rivalry. Seventh years watched with a little melancholy, knowing this might be their last school match. The whistle blew, and the game began. Slytherin's special training showed at the start. They used brute force to knock several Gryffindor players off their brooms and launched quick attacks that put them 30 points ahead. But Gryffindor's teamwork closed the gap, and once they'd found their rhythm, they fought back and took the lead. The game tightened around the two seekers. Harry and Draco became streaks of motion, two figures twisting and darting through the air. Even without the golden snitch visible, their speed pushed their brooms to the limit. Wind dragged at their faces. They clung to each other, eyes wide, each refusing to give an inch. "Tsk," Loren said with a grin. "If either of them loses this, they might never get over it." "Quidditch alone is boring," he went on, enjoying the drama. "I hope they schedule a duel afterward, though that wouldn't be fair to Draco. How about a proper hand-to-hand fight? No regrets before graduation." Hermione said nothing and fixed him with an expressionless look. 796, the last Quidditch sequence. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the match had already been going on for 4 hours. A handful of students sat in the stands, happily snacking as they watched. The frenetic ebb and flow of earlier attacks had cooled. Sustained, furious offense had been impossible to maintain, and hunger and thirst were wearing the players down. Both teams were tired, movements slower, attacks less frequent. For much of the crowd, the game had lost its edge. Unless an attack developed, they only needed to shuffle and guard. To be honest, it was a little dull. The score was close, and the outcome depended entirely on the seekers. Many seats were empty. Some spectators had given up and gone to the Great Hall to eat, not yet returned. The front rows were occupied by Hogwarts staff. Students could slip away, but the professors could not. Under the watchful eyes of the young, they were trapped in their seats. Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout wore strained smiles. This year's final had little to do with them and held little interest. After 4 hours, they simply wanted the ordeal to end. Even the two deputy heads, Minerva and Severus, had paused their quarrel and fallen into more collegial tones. These two teams are relentless. I hope it ends before sunset. Draco's search half an hour ago was right. If they'd moved to the right side of the pitch then, the snitch would probably have been forced out, and the game would be over. Harry's call an hour ago was right. If they'd spread to cover more ground, the snitch would already be caught. Minerva, Severus, you can finish this over dinner. For now, I'd rather quietly watch the match. I agree with Phileas, Minerva said, more mildly. Dumbledore listened from the side, his gaze fixed on the two figures tangled above the Quidditch pitch, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. Only a very few in the stands realized this would be the last Quidditch match he would watch at Hogwarts. Fortunately, it was memorable enough to last him years. Harry gripped his broom hard, his face pale but composed. Judged by seeker skill alone, he thought himself on a par with Crumb in the Triwizard Year. He had mastered the maneuvers, his nerves were steady, and Gryffindor was ahead on points. Draco beside him felt more pressure. 2 years' suspension had left him rusty, yet with months of training and sheer force of will, he'd clung to Harry like a venomous snake wrapped around the Slytherin banner. Their aerial duel was thrilling. Sudden stops, dives, low climbs, and sprinting turns, a constant trade of acceleration and feints that brought waves of cheers. Even those who didn't understand the game could appreciate the artistry of the flying. In the end, Harry caught the golden snitch by half a body's length. Gryffindor's winning streak continued. The roar from the stands was extraordinary. Gryffindor exploded with cheers. Slytherin sat in stunned silence. Some walked down the steps clutching their green banners, heavier of foot than usual. The 4-hour stalemate had given them hope. That hope dying now made the loss harder to accept. Draco was spent, almost numb. Watching the opposite team celebrate, a complicated expression passed over his face. Some things felt like this. You give everything, you almost succeed, and yet you fail. That sense of helplessness stung worse than muscle pain. Players, shake hands! Madame Hooch's whistle cut through his thoughts. Draco forced a smile, shrugged, and walked forward to line up. The Gryffindors flooded the pitch. Colin Creevey, cheeks flushed, lugged a camera nearly as large as his head. Harry, lift the cup! Stand in the middle! 7th years, gather around, more to the side, yes! Loren and Hermione squeezed into the back row, right corner. 1, 2, 3, cheese! The photograph was taken. As the sun slid toward the western horizon, the surface of the Black Lake glittered. The cheers from the pitch had not yet died away. The victory had brightened Gryffindor faces. Slytherin would recover in time. The graduating players lingered on the field, running hands along broom handles, standing under the goal hoops, letting the sounds of bat against bludger and the smell of turf etch themselves into memory, tiny rituals of farewell. It was not as melancholy as some might imagine. Other students wandered the lake shore, playing in the warm evening, idly exploring. To the right, a cluster of rocks and dense shrubs made a quieter stretch of shore. Beech trees cast a deep canopy, and mosquitoes were worse there, so few students came after dusk. A few, however, thought the spot beautiful, among them the old headmaster in a gray-white robe. With no paperwork or dark wizards to preoccupy him, Dumbledore had allowed himself to enjoy the match. The glow over the lake and the thrill of the game both felt like memories worth keeping. He waved his sleeve to shoo away mosquitoes, calm and patient. A bird's wings beat overhead. A black-brown owl dropped onto the headmaster's office window with a soft thud, a letter from Mr. Q Hogue in New York. Since Christmas, he had not stopped asking about Loren, and not long ago Miss Jorkins had begun to write with strange, tentative questions. They were probing, not daring to ask outright. Dumbledore's blue eyes held the last light of day. Many things that had been unclear were resolving into outlines. He still lacked the full picture of the plan Loren had hinted at, but he trusted his student. The sun sank and the ripples dimmed. Dumbledore stood near the rocks where the rise of the shore met the water. 100 years before, when he had been a student at Hogwarts, the same sunset had looked much the same. Only the shrubs had grown denser now. A cool breeze came off the forbidden forest, bringing damp and the slow spread of evening mist. Leaves rustled behind him. Dumbledore turned. A familiar figure pushed through the brush, stepping out in a Gryffindor robe, black hair, dark eyes, a faint smile. "Headmaster, so you're here," Loren said. "Trouble comes knocking, does it?" Dumbledore replied. "How could helping students be trouble?" Loren laughed. He'd been too busy photobombing the team shot to remember his appointment with the headmaster until the light began to fade. Fortunately, Dumbledore's presence made the spot the brightest place after sundown. Dumbledore's smile was indulgent. He had read the letters from Miss Jorkins and Mr. Quohog and had begun to assemble fragments of the plan from other clues. It was complex, far broader than a bookkeeping problem. Tell me. Loren set the story out sparingly. It starts with the Book of Abraham. Items and clues left by legendary wizards have come into my hands. They've slowly formed a path to what might be called a promised land of magic, a new spatial displacement device. I see. Dumbledore's long experience with alchemy and theory let him follow the idea quickly. What are the chances of success? He asked. I don't know. Loren shrugged. The device is stalled at the last step of mass production. Using one Philosopher's Stone to regulate a single unit is doable for a practiced wizard, but this kind of long-distance teleportation needs thousands of devices arranged in a matrix, synchronized so their outputs match perfectly. Any mismatch will interfere. I don't see a way to ensure perfect simultaneous regulation. I can't think of a solution, so I've come to you. Dumbledore's eyes flickered as he thought. Thousands of devices linked and centrally regulated by a core Philosopher's Stone. Somewhere in his mind, a picture of interconnected springs and channels formed, a system where many sources had to be kept in unity. An answer came to him, quietly, like a recollection. This book was updated recently, he said, then allowed himself a small, amused shake of his head. Magic is always wondrous. Even after a century of probing its limits, even when you delve into life and death, there's still the sense that magic itself might have a kind of consciousness, arranging things. Loren, do you remember a vow we once made? You mean. Loren lifted his right hand to look at his index finger. Golden, flame-like sigils swam beneath the print, an old magical contract. Dumbledore raised his own hand. The same light shivered at his fingertip. They had bound themselves once before. The castle was very quiet at dusk. When Loren and Dumbledore returned to the main hall, they found a girl waiting at the foot of the marble staircase. The sun had set, and the moon not yet risen. The last of the sunset still lingered in the sky. In the fading light, she stood looking down at a couple of tiny yellow wildflowers at her feet. A breeze lifted the hair at her temples, softening her outline. Loren's pace quickened. He crossed and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, then slipped an arm around her shoulder. Hermione. She wiped the edge of his mouth with an unruffled glance and said quietly, Has Headmaster Dumbledore found a solution? For our graduation trip, Loren said lightly, let's go look for the Good Fortune Spring. Hermione blinked. They entered the great hall to the rich smell of dinner. Perhaps to make up for missed lunch, the feast seemed especially abundant that night. They moved along the line together, picking and sharing dishes as they always did. The Good Fortune Spring? Hermione asked, following Loren's movements with earnest curiosity. Yes, the one from the Tales of Beetle the Bard. Loren used a spoon to set mashed potatoes with minced beef on Hermione's plate. I promised the headmaster that if I restrained my use of legilimency, he would tell me about the spring. So the vow was kept? It was an excuse at the time, Loren admitted. Dumbledore fussed about my use of legilimency, the dark arts that delve into minds, and wanted reassurance. I agreed to calm his worries more than I needed calming. They moved down the table. Does the Good Fortune Spring have anything to do with the displacement device? Hermione asked. Dumbledore thinks it might. Loren spooned a serving of black pudding onto Hermione's plate. She watched, fascinated. He believes the spring could stabilize the Philosopher's Stone's output, prevent interference between units, and make large-scale long-distance displacement practical. Hermione's breath caught, so the last hurdle to mass production might be solved. Her expression softened into something like awe. Did the headmaster give any advice about your plan? Any suggestions? No, he's very nearly retired. If it weren't for Voldemort tied to the school, he'd be off traveling. He thinks every generation has its own problems and its own solutions. He feels his historical mission is mostly done. They walked back, Loren carrying 2 trays. Hermione paused and handed him her plate. There's cream of mushroom soup over there. Could you get me some? I'll wait. He went to fetch it. When he returned, he found himself staring at the black pudding on Hermione's plate. He'd tasted it once before and could not describe it, somewhere between daring and dread. Now, with graduation near, he felt impulsively that he could try again. After a moment, he nudged the black pudding over to her with a conspiratorial grin. Hermione accepted the portion with a look at him that was equal parts curiosity and resolve. They ate in the dimming hall, conversation drifting from the spring to plans and small, ordinary things. Loren's eyes found Hermione's more than once. In the lamplight, she seemed younger and more luminous. The child she had been, innocent and lovely, had been changed by what she'd learned and by what she had to carry now. That Hermione, sweet, unspoiled, could not be restored. Hermione had risen early and was sitting on the sofa in the common room, flipping through her notes with a focused expression. Her lips moved as she silently recited what she'd written. After going over her second-year charms notes, she kept turning pages until her fingers stopped. She unconsciously touched the pendant at her throat, and her face softened. These were her notes on the Patronus charm. The ink had shifted from quill to ballpoint. The handwriting was neat, almost fastidiously tidy, and a little childish in places. At some point, she had switched to cursive. Her script was still clear, but very different from a few years before. The section about casting posture even included a few crude stick figure drawings. She remembered that first summer practicing the Patronus charm, Loren had been loafing nearby. It was hard to believe 5 years had passed. They had all learned the Patronus long ago. It was just that it had been a while since she'd summoned one. One of their corporeal Patronuses had been an orca and another a dolphin. Everyone said the Patronus was tied to the soul and emotions. Had their corporeal Patronuses influenced each other? Who had influenced whom? Hermione let the question sit without forcing an answer. Footsteps came from the solid wood staircase. Hermione looked up. It was early and the common room was quiet. Most Gryffindors didn't get up at this hour. The stair treads were covered in soft carpet and charmed during construction, so they usually muffled sound, but the steps she heard were deliberately loud, a heavy, stomping clank. Loren came down, followed by Crookshanks, who was a fat, lumpy bundle of fur. With a gentle nudge of his toe, Crookshanks lost his balance and slid off the step in a comically gooey tumble. Hermione couldn't help but be silent for a moment, thinking of the documentaries she'd watched about orcas and dolphins. Her memory had always been good. She could picture those programs that showed orcas deliberately breaching near ferries to splash water or bump hulls, teasing seals and sea turtles just for fun. If animals like that could be playful and mischievous, then perhaps the question about the Patronus had an answer after all. They had breakfast together and then dawdled downstairs for 10 minutes before heading to potions. The first morning class was Professor Snape's, and the classroom door stood ajar. A sharp, medicinal odor hit them as they pushed it open. It smelled like whatever potion the previous class had been brewing. Only a handful of Gryffindors were in their area, 3 or 4 at most, including 2 prefects. More Slytherins were already seated, quietly reviewing notes. Draco sat in the front corner, staring blankly at a letter in his hand, still looking dazed after the Quidditch final loss. Loren shook his head and followed Hermione to the other side of the front row. He hadn't even put his bag down before a voice from the back called out, "Loren, I have a question. Do you think I'd make a good Auror?" "What is your grandmother pushing you toward Auror again?" Loren answered without looking up. "Don't change the subject. Just tell me." "Okay, no." Loren finally turned, opened his bag, and started taking out his potions textbook and notes. Neville's shoulders drooped. "Why not? I've got the grades. I meet the recruitment requirements." "Is that so? If you had to go after criminals, could you cast unforgivable curses on a dark wizard without hesitating?" "You don't always need unforgivables to control people. Professor Flitwick complimented my dueling." Professor Flitwick also praised Hannah for being calm under pressure. Loren smiled faintly. "Look, everyone's different. Some people are decisive and forceful, others are gentle and slow to warm up. You've got a strong affinity with people, Neville, but personality matters. Face it, no matter how good your grades are, you don't have the temperament for an Auror." Neville already had a feeling that was the answer, but hearing it out loud still stung. "I just want a cooler job." "Go feed dragons in Romania," Loren suggested. Neville's face went plaintive, preferably in Britain. Do you also want it close to home, 9 to 5, weekends off, and long summer and Christmas holidays? With your family, the pay doesn't have to be that high either. Is there any job like that? Neville asked. Train owls in Diagon Alley. That's not cool at all. That's odd. Neville Longbottom, afraid of the rough side of things. Have you been imperioused by your grandmother? Neville sighed and wiped at his face. I was planning to stay at Hogwarts as a teaching assistant or help my parents with the business. But 2 days ago, Hannah told me she's going to take over the Leaky Cauldron when she graduates and run the place. That's a really cool job. I want to be like her. You could always work as a waiter at the Leaky Cauldron. That's worse than feeding owls. Come on, being your girlfriend's subordinate and living off her is the height of cool. Neville looked unconvinced for a moment and glancing at Hermione, who was still bent over her notes, ears a little pink, though she seemed not to be listening. Neville stopped himself and said, "Never mind. I'll see a professor for career advice when I get the chance." Loren clicked his tongue and shook his head at how short-sighted people could be, then opened his textbook to the section they'd covered in the last lesson. The notes were full of strategies for dealing with tricky exam questions. What to do if you can't complete a stirring in time during a brew. If the invigilator isn't watching, you might freeze the potion's reaction with a time-freezing charm and resume when you've finished stirring. The old criticism about treating a bezoar as a panacea had been turned into an emergency, last-ditch tactic for scoring partial credit. After the Quidditch final the week before, the countdown to finals had begun in earnest. Seventh years weren't sitting regular finals at Hogwarts. They were preparing for the NETs, the nastily exhausting wizarding tests, optional, higher-level exams taken at the end of seventh year to assess learning over the past 2 years. Many professions demanded high NEWT grades in specific subjects. Not every witch or wizard had to take them. Some could get good jobs with only their OWLs. 798, the last exam May, early summer. Bright sunlight filtered through the Black Lake and fell through the skylight into the dim underground classroom, lending everything a slightly hazy, dreamlike glow. In runes, the number 5 signifies ether, the fifth element beyond earth, fire, water, and air. Classical alchemy held it to be the medium that carries light, infinitely small, existing between illusion and reality, ubiquitous across the universe. Influenced by that theory, scholars in other fields had once devised many ingenious spells. Later, it was disproved. Potions, before the 17th century, had been among the disciplines shaped by the idea of ether. Disproving the ether theory by comparing the properties of similar potions is an important test point for the ultimate wizard examination, Professor Snape's low voice intoned through the underground room. Loren sat in the second row by the window beside Hermione, listening closely. This was the first potions lesson in May and the start of final review. Snape was reviewing advanced potion theory. He rarely relied on textbooks. The notes on the blackboard were the distilled points of his lecture, and he explained the principles by walking through the brewing of several simple potions. Magical theory, despite millennia of development, remained obscure both at the macro and micro scales. No wizard had yet proposed a comprehensive theory of all magic. Generations of wizards had built different frameworks to explain underlying principles. For centuries, potion theory had been dominated by the Labacious Borage school. Potions were the outcome of unique magics inherent in materials, processed by a potion maker, so ingredients reacted and catalyzed new effects. Method was merely the process. The materials determined the result. Snape, an outsider to that mainstream, argued otherwise. He taught that potions shared common principles with alchemy, charms, and other disciplines, that the constraints of ingredients could be transcended by looking at ritual and form. Brewing methods were equivalent to the casting motions of charms and the magic circles of alchemy. Their importance outstripped that of the raw components. Ideas like this had been suggested centuries ago, but had been marginal and rarely noticed until Severus Snape consolidated them and published them in the potions journals. Normally, an arcane academic riff would have attracted little attention, but Snape openly attacked the works of Labacious Borage, texts considered foundational in potion making. He critiqued books such as 40,000 Ways to Process Common Ingredients, The Origins of Potions, A Pharmacist's Apprentice's Attempt, Advanced Potion Making, and 11 others. 40,000 Ways reads more like poetry than potion making. Borrage's 40,000 techniques can be categorized and reduced. If he cannot simplify them, he has not truly learned to use ingredients. My summary of common processing methods is as follows. Borrage's claim that potions originated solely from European pharmacy is absurd. It's baseless and illogical. I've seen primitive tribes in Africa and mysterious pharmacologies in the East that contradict that narrative. Some brewing methods in advanced potion making have merit, but cumbersome steps are not the same as correct theory. Here are my optimized improvements. His tone was brutal, almost a finger-wagging denunciation. The journal issue sold out the month his paper appeared. Many in the field were enraged at first, publishing rebuttals and letters calling his work sensationalist. But as more potion masters reproduced difficult potions using his methods with far lower failure rates, supporters multiplied. Severus Snape became famous. The price of potion journals at Diagon Alley newsstands doubled. Loren subscribed to several issues and thoroughly enjoyed the controversy. The war of ideas was entertaining, and through experiment it had begun to win converts. Only a few centenarian skeptics remained. Light from the skylight gently swayed with the lake above. The pendulum of the grandfather clock by the wall ticked methodically. Snape folded his lesson plan with 10 minutes to spare. "The examination is in 1 month," he said, scanning the room in a flat, unreadable voice. "You may choose which homework to complete," he added. "If your fundamentals are solid and you find an assignment unhelpful, skip it and use the time to read recommended material." Students responded with the routine assent. Snape glanced at the clock and, perhaps mindful of his duties as headmaster, did not let them leave early. Yesterday at dinner, the professors discussed exam pressure. Professor Flitwick mentioned a Hufflepuff girl who is severely anxious, staying up late, losing her appetite, even vomiting when she sees others studying in the Great Hall. Bring up anything off topic and the room came alive. "I know, it's Eloise from Hufflepuff." "Isn't it Susan Bones?" "Then I won't read in the Great Hall anymore." "Have you considered it might not be the books?" "What do you mean?" Snape seemed to understand why Minerva had grown stricter as headmistress. If he were even slightly gentler, students would undo years of deterrence and run wild. He tapped the podium, and the chatter fell away. "I won't offer empty comfort that the ultimate wizard examination is unimportant. For many wizards planning careers in the magical world, the certificate is a stepping stone. It opens doors, saves time, and smooths your path for the next decade. But a wizard's life is longer than you think. In the sweep of a long life, this exam is not everything. With 1 month left, you should have a sense of where you stand. If you know you can't reach the results you want, remember the regret and resolve not to fall into the same trap again." Silence returned, broken only by the shifting light and shadow from the skylight. Snape's words unsettled some. They were only 17. Who could predict what the future held? The bell rang for dismissal. The second week of June, the ultimate wizard-level examinations began. Loren sat in the back row of the exam hall, quietly writing. The procedure mirrored the OWLs. Even the invigilator was a familiar face. The day's exam was Transfiguration. The examiners had clearly used Professor McGonagall's recent papers for reference. Aside from the perennial basics, the essays were familiar. Briefly explain the principle of the animagus. Explain connections between human transfiguration and astrology. Choose either solar or lunar phases and analyze the link in detail. Compare traditional animagus training with the animal experience method. List similarities and differences and analyze the reasons. For students who had attended animagus class, the morning paper was almost trivial. The afternoon practical was indulgent. Invigilators favored students who could transform on demand. Anyone who shifted into an animal and back on the spot earned extra practical marks. The hall became a zoo, chickens fluttering, dogs barking, animals making a general ruckus. Loren suspected the examiners and chief invigilators had been bribed by Professor McGonagall. NEWTs ran 2 weeks. The following week, charms, potions, defense against the dark arts, and care of magical creatures followed. each with a theory paper in the morning and practical in the afternoon. Difficulty was moderate, and outstanding seemed within reach. Final grades were weighted summaries of theory and practice into one of the familiar marks. O, outstanding. E, exceeds expectations. A, acceptable. P, poor, dreadful. T, troll. How those weights were calculated remained a mystery. Some said theory counted for 60% and practice 40%. Others claimed the reverse, and some thought it changed each year. The ambiguity was deliberate, to ensure the certificate didn't simply reward bookworms or innate show-offs, but a professional competency useful across the magical world. Loren figured he wouldn't need these certificates for the roles he'd later hold, but he valued the exams nonetheless. They were a summary of 7 years at Hogwarts and of his arrival in this world. These were his student days, easy, beautiful, and a little busy. Weekends were exam-free. One evening, as the setting sun painted the astronomy tower red, Loren took Hermione up to the top platform with 2 dinners from the Great Hall. The food was a bit cold, but they ate while enjoying the breeze and the sunset. After they finished, Loren cleaned the plates, slipped them into his pendant, and put an arm around Hermione to wait for the moon. "How did your exams feel?" he asked, asking about feelings while grading answers. Hermione cocked her head and blinked. "What's wrong with you, Mr. Morgan? Didn't you always dislike this kind of thing?" "Does complaining help?" Loren retorted. Hermione smiled faintly. "I think I did very well. I should get all the certificates. I thought you'd spend the evening fretting you'd left out 2 methods on a question, or that your wand movements weren't textbook perfect in the practical. So, someone could deliberately magnify my mistakes and enjoy watching me get nervous," she said. Loren squeezed her shoulder. "My dear Hermione understands me best." She hummed and fell silent, watching the sky darken to a deep, clear blue. The only sound was the evening wind over the tower. Loren shifted his arm around her shoulders and with a trace of feeling in his voice said, "We've graduated." Hermione's eyes held tiny reflected stars. "Yes," she murmured, "we've graduated." The last day of the NEWTs arrived. Practical exams were done. The remaining papers this week were theory only. That day brought ancient runes and history of magic. Runes was a class both Loren and Hermione had taken. The exam hall was a 5th-floor classroom. Professor Babbling accompanied the invigilator on rounds. When she saw Loren, she offered an odd smile and whispered to the invigilator. The 2 then stood behind him, blatantly peering at his parchment as if it were a public show, unconcerned they might disturb his concentration. Loren silently resolved to file a complaint after the exam. The runes paper, set by the Ministry's Department of Education and based on the basic texts, posed little difficulty for Loren. He finished the objective section in half an hour of the allotted 2.5. The 2 behind him watched with obvious glee, trading smiles. Loren turned to the translation exercises, inscriptions thousands of years old, eroded by wind and sand until the original strokes were blurred. Even the highest-ranking department scholars hadn't fully deciphered them. The examiners had chosen a few clearer fragments as scoring points. It felt almost like a gamble. If a student got a breakthrough, it would be a major academic event. Otherwise, no harm done. As Loren reached the last page, the gazes behind him tightened until he felt them like pricks on his back. He worked through a few obvious scoring bits, then paused. Bending forward to shield their view, he wrote a line of words in the blank space at the bottom and quickly flipped the parchment to cover it. The only sound the 2 behind him heard was the rustle of paper. Loren sat up with his arms folded over his paper, nothing visible. Babbling and the invigilator exchanged awkward glances, discomfort written on their faces. 1 more hour, 40 more minutes, 30 more minutes. Why isn't it time to hand in the papers yet? Professor Babbling paced up and down the aisles of the examination hall, her footsteps steady as she patrolled the room. Every so often, she tilted her head to glance at the grandfather clock in the corner. She was dying to see what Loren had written for his final translation, but his hands were folded and his back was rigid, his paper completely hidden. In theory, written exams allowed early submission. Some students who finished early would still sit and reread their answers until the bell. Loren wasn't one of those. He'd handed in early for every other written paper and had refused to for the runes exam on purpose. Professor Babbling was convinced of it. Students like that ought to be made to do detention, forced to spend their weekends translating documents, hunting down references for the faculty, ferrying letters. She should have insisted he take runes, she thought, kicking herself. If she'd had him in class and used Miss Know-It-all, Hermione, to coerce him into helping translate ancient inscriptions, he might have produced work of real academic value in 4 years. All those missed publications, the regret made the wait unbearable. She checked the clock again, 20 minutes to go. As she made another circuit, she found herself behind Loren, and almost without thinking, glanced at the edge of his paper. Her eyes widened. There was a gap at the corner, and she made out a fragment that looked like completed. Could it be? Her heart gave a little leap. That inscription had been debated for centuries by runic scholars. Some translations did include the word completed. Had the world-renowned alchemist's reading been the same? Professor Babbling allowed herself a flicker of excitement and relaxed her posture, just enough for Loren's arm to shift and block the view again. Her mood soured instantly. She was tempted to confiscate the paper on the spot, but her faculty composure won out. Curious and irritated, she moved away and tried another angle, toward Hermione. But Hermione's answers were the expected, proper sort. No surprises. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung with dull, steady certainty. 10 minutes dripped by. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. The bell rang. Students rose as one, clustered around the invigilator at the podium, and within moments the hall began to empty. Loren vanished in the flow. The invigilator sorted the papers into a stack. The Department of Education's procedure did not use candidate numbers, so the order was arbitrary. As the stack was prepared for sealing, Professor Babbling stepped forward under the pretense of helping. Her fingers hovered over the papers until she drew out Loren's. She flipped to the last translation question and fell silent. In neat, even characters across the page read, "One's own academic research should be completed by oneself." Professor Babbling's breath hitched. The small declaration was simple and absolute. For a moment, she felt both chagrin and a strange admiration. Then, with the papers sealed, there was nothing more to be done. 2 p.m., History of Magic Examination Hall. The outermost seat on the right of the front row. Hermione's hands rested on the desk. She glanced up at the blackboard behind the podium, taking in the exam details. Subject, History of Magic. Duration, 2.5 hours. Professor, Cuthbert Binns, Ghost. Invigilator, Griselda Marchbanks. History of Magic as the last exam was traditional. The hall held an almost audible stillness. Hermione felt it press in around her until the bell shook her back into focus. Madame Marchbanks handed out the papers. Hermione smelled the ink from Diagon Alley on the sheets, but didn't start writing. She skimmed the whole paper first. 51 questions. Most answers were straight from the textbook, memory work. As the school's resident know-it-all, the bulk of it was trivial. The last question, a material analysis, was something else. She filled in her candidate details, turned to the first page, and began to write. History of Magic was a core subject at Hogwarts. Transfiguration, charms, potions, defense against the dark arts, and history were all compulsory. Classes were typically scheduled in the mornings to reflect that importance, and students studied it through 5th year. Afterwards, few took advanced history. The subject had a reputation as a sleepy, text-only class taught by a slow-moving ghost, dull and rigid. For Hogwarts' highest-level exam, only a handful had opted in, so the questions were mostly straightforward memory tests. The first 50 questions were exactly that. Then Hermione reached question 51. 51. Read the materials and complete the following requirements. Material 1. The Goblin Rebellions were a series of revolts initiated by goblins to oppose the discrimination and prejudice of wizards against them. Goblin rebellions were quite common in the 17th and 18th centuries, and according to the Daily Prophet, even today, there are still goblin revolutionary groups opposing the rule of the Ministry of Magic. Historically, the Goblin rebellions were often described as bloody and thrilling. The Goblin Rebellion of 1612 occurred near Hogsmeade, when a small pub in Hogsmeade was used as the wizard command post. Wizards successfully defeated the Goblin army and achieved victory, negotiating with the Goblin royal family and quickly reaching an agreement. The Wand Act, signed by both parties, became a model cited by countries around the world, and thereafter all goblins were forbidden from using wands. Another goblin rebellion occurred in the 18th century, which was also a very famous rebellion. The Goblin Urge the Unclean participated in this rebellion and thus appeared on a chocolate frog card. Image: Urg the Unclean holding a wand. Material 2. From the early 15th century, Muggle persecution of wizarding families had already begun across Europe. Many wizards were arrested, imprisoned, and sentenced to death for engaging in witchcraft, evil supernatural abilities in Muggle perception. Although most wizards escaped using magic, such as Lysette de Lapun in 1422, some wizards were not so fortunate. Sir Fortine de Mincy Poppington was deprived of his wand and imprisoned in a dungeon, thus unable to use magic to escape his fate of execution. This period of unrest caused hundreds of wizarding families to lose their children, because children could not yet control their magic, often attracting the attention of Muggles hunting wizards and were powerless to resist. Hogwarts' new student enrollment rate drastically declined. Wizards abandoned the classical magic era's notion of helping Muggles, believing that using magic to help their Muggle neighbors was tantamount to actively adding fuel to the fire that would burn themselves. As Muggle persecution of underage wizards gradually intensified and expanded, more and more Muggle lords forced wizards to use magic for them, including cases where Muggles were mistakenly burned as witches, which also gradually increased. In the 17th century, the relationship between wizards and Muggles reached its lowest point. The newly established British Ministry of Magic dispatched a special delegation of 12 wizards to the Muggle Palace to negotiate with Muggle monarchs William III and Mary II, hoping that Muggle law would recognize and protect wizards. This attempt to gain official recognition and protection ultimately failed, forcing wizards to voluntarily develop in the opposite direction, hiding their identities and keeping secrets. The International Law of Secrecy was signed into effect in 1689. Wizards put away their wands, hid their identities, and tried to avoid contact with Muggles. Wizarding society became isolated from Muggle society, gradually forming wizarding communities. Many small villages attracted several wizarding families, who then united, helping and protecting each other. Tinworth in Cornwall, Upper Flagley in Yorkshire, Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon, and Godric's Hollow in southwest England. History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. Questions. 1. In the eyes of some goblins, the Wand Treaty is an unjust treaty and should be abolished. Analyze whether the Wand legislation promoted or curbed the 18th century goblin rebellions. 2. Is the law of secrecy a Wand Treaty that restricts wizards? Is it still applicable in the present era, and why? 3. Can wizards force Muggles to abandon or suspend technological development through war, curbing the harm technology inflicts on various magical creatures, and why? The supporting materials and the 3-layered questions filled the last page. Hermione paused, pen hovering. The facts were textbook, the questions were different, probing, political, and pointed. This wasn't the usual safe, objective history exam. Whoever had written it had been thinking about long-term consequences. The change could only mean that Loren's conversation with Madame Jorkins had reached the higher levels of the ministry, the Wizengamot. Maybe they'd already decided, or maybe they were still testing opinion, either the road to conquest and subjugating Muggles as they had goblins, or the alternative Loren had suggested. Hermione didn't bother answering the preliminary, guiding parts. She put her quill into the inkwell, waited for it to take ink, and then wrote what she had been thinking since the plan was first revealed. Scores didn't matter for this question. The right answer might only be judged by wizards centuries from now. She turned the blank into an argument. Wizards cannot stop technological development any more than they can stop the march of Muggle progress. Since the dark wizards of the classical magic era dug the unforgivable curses out of old papers, Avada Kedavra became a favored tool for murder. It lingered unchanged for centuries until Lord Voldemort broke through its single-target limitation. That optimization did not survive, and few would mourn that it did. Meanwhile, Muggles, the wielders of technology, have continually innovated. Firearms reached new levels of lethality last century, and Avada Kedavra has no limitations, but a firearm can be used by anyone, even a child. Muggles have developed artillery, white phosphorus incendiaries, biological agents, and even nuclear weapons, the technological counterparts to spells like Diffindo, Fiendfire, and Exploding Charms. If there were a direct war between wizards and muggles, victory is hardly assured. Wizards who adopt the methods of Death Eaters and other dark practitioners might inflict severe damage, but both sides would suffer immense losses. The outcome would be unpredictable. We must also consider that the magical world does not consist of wizards alone. There are many sentient magical creatures, goblin, house elf, giant kind, and others. How would they be treated or swayed? Which path would they choose? We can make the right choice. We should reach outward, venture into the broader world, and build a better future. Force will only breed resistance and tragedy. Adaptation and cooperation offer a chance at survival and moral integrity. Her handwriting joined a few strokes together, but remained neat and clear. The argument flowed without stumbles or blotches. She regretted not answering the first two sub-questions explicitly, better to secure the marks, but she did not erase or revise. She turned the page back over to reread the earlier questions. 30 minutes later, the bell rang. Hermione checked her candidate details and prepared to hand in her paper. As she rose, she felt a presence beside her. Madame Marchbanks already stood there. "Miss Granger," the old woman said gently, "I was patrolling and saw you writing the last question. It moved me a little. I'm old and my mind wanders sometimes. Go on, hand in your paper." Hermione smiled faintly, said nothing, and went to submit her exam. 800. The school days are over. What's the answer to the fourth question? Who founded the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Perseus Parkinson or Eldritch Diggory? It was Ulick Gamp. Gamp? Wasn't he a wizard in the field of Transfiguration? You're probably thinking of Gamp's Law of Transfiguration. That's a different Gamp. Damn it, couldn't they pick a more unique name? Crunch, crunch. Loren stood in the corridor outside the exam room, chewing hazelnut snacks while listening to his classmates argue over answers. He smiled, clearly pleased with himself. When Hermione emerged from the classroom, he didn't stop chewing. He casually pulled a handful of hazelnuts from his coat pocket and offered them as she walked up. "Always so thorough, aren't you? You even waited for the bell to hand in your paper for a simple history of magic exam. Miss Granger's been at Hogwarts for 7 years, and she's the same as ever." "The final essay took up some time," Hermione said, taking a hazelnut and tasting it. She grew quiet for a moment. "If I remember correctly, these are the ones I bought for Hansch last week, right?" "Heh." Loren grinned. "Good, aren't they?" They were good. Hermione couldn't quite get past whatever small barrier she felt, so after a moment she slipped the rest back into his pocket and steered the conversation toward the exam. "How did you answer that last essay question?" "After I read it, I roughly counted the points and realized I could still get my certificate if I skipped it, so I left it blank." The students in the corridor slowly dispersed. Seventh years wandered the castle, relieved and lightheaded. Now the examinations were done. Some toured the grounds at dusk, reluctant to leave a school that had been home for so long. With the last paper finished, a few sharp students had already begun to feel the countdown to departure. If nothing unexpected happened, they might not return. Many drifted down to the courtyards and the Black Lake shore to breathe the evening air and savor that rare, once-in-a-lifetime feeling. Loren and Hermione, however, went up the tower. Before they knew it, they were sitting on the outer wall, high above the grounds. Loren still muttered about the exam. "I turned my paper in early and came out to wait, but I saw you were still buried in yours, so I went to sunbathe in the courtyard for a while." "You really didn't write anything for it?" Hermione asked, her calves swinging gently in the breeze. "Like my plans, or the new spatial displacement device, or the irreconcilable conflicts between muggles and wizards, or the needs of other magical creatures. Maybe I could argue to the International Confederation of Wizards to get them to help. There's no need. Their help speeds things up, but if they don't want to cooperate, they won't stop me. Why bother writing so much?" A faint light flashed in Hermione's eyes. "Are you already showing dictatorial tendencies, Mr. Morgan?" Loren swallowed the hazelnuts in his mouth and looked up at her when he noticed Hermione watching him. He offered her another hazelnut. If you can't speak properly, don't speak. Hermione pressed her lips together and refused. Loren, intrigued, reached out and pinched her nose, forcing her mouth open a crack. Her teeth were clenched, so the nut was still blocked by her lips. Loren had no other immediate plan, so he sacrificed himself. He eased her mouth open and slipped the hazelnut inside. Once it opened up, it wasn't cold or hard at all, rather fragrant and soft. These hazelnuts had been specially prepared, dried, roasted, and fried in turns, with salt, sugar, butter, and spices added, then shelled and magically packed. Even among owls, they were considered a luxury. They carried a rich, milky aroma and a perfect balance of salty and sweet, truly delicious. It was mid-June, the hottest part of the year. Hogwarts nights still held the summer heat, and the students' post-exam excitement made the late hours feel feverish. After saying goodnight to the fat lady and slipping through the portrait hole, the common room was a lively whirl. Dozens of candles floated under the ceiling, while torches and oil lamps on the walls burned as bright as day. In that boisterous light, the clang of wizards' chess, the snapping of gobstones, and the shouts of Quidditch fans blended into a constant, raucous laughter that felt perfectly right. This revelry came every year and usually lasted for days, and only settling down the night before the end-of-year feast. Loren and Hermione arrived late and were immediately tugged to a window seat. Harry and Ron, surprisingly, hadn't joined the Wizards' chess or Quidditch games. That was startling to everyone. Friends gathered, chatting and reminiscing in companionable fashion. How many times had they sat here on return-to-school nights during previous years? Now, looking back, only a wistful sigh remained. Loren teased them. You were clearly rushing to finish your homework back then. The room cooled a little at the remark, but no one took the bait. The conversation drifted to astronomy, then to nights spent star-watching in their first year, and a chance encounter with Professor Quirrell in the corridor. From Quirrell's turban, they moved on to the curse that had plagued the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, and then to Professor Lupin. I remember when Professor Lupin first came to school, he was on the same express train as us, and we ran into Dementors, someone said. He must have been a student here himself once, another added. Of all the Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers, Lupin's probably the best fit. Professor Bagshot isn't bad either, very philosophical. And Professor Moody in our fourth year was the most unforgettable. They talked as if there would never be an end, and they kept talking until dawn. Loren grew sleepy, stood and yawned. I'm going back to the dormitory to sleep. It's only 1 o'clock. Let's chat for a few more hours and watch the sunrise, someone urged. The sunrise happens every day. What's so special about that? Loren replied. Hermione glanced at him. Save some energy for tomorrow. If you can, say goodbye to Sir Cadogan and Sir Nicholas, then talk with the professors. The exams are over. You can estimate your grades and ask for a career consultation. If your marks aren't enough, ask about recommendation letters. Loren yawned again, took Hermione's hand, and they left. They said goodnight at the bottom of the stairs and slowly walked off together, their silhouettes receding into the castle as if the night's commotion had no effect on them, a quiet distinction that set them apart. The classmates by the window exchanged looks and scratched their heads. They had always felt the two of them were a little more mature, their perspectives different from the rest. Tonight, that impression had only deepened.